The science that goes into this underwater site may provide some of the most important evidence that we have had to prove that these civilizations existed before the last ice age, before 12,000 years ago. We are diving down to the underwater ruins on Lake Vaughan that are 85 feet underwater. They are the deepest confirmed underwater ruins anywhere in the world. We have scientific data that show when that volcano erupted, Murat River was blocked, proving that these ruins are at least 12,000 years old. The flower of life that's on that capstone underwater has 6 spokes, exactly like the Osirian flower of life. This is the newest ancient site of significance like this in the world. The reason why there's so many similarities with this idea of Peru and Bolivia with Lake Vaughan and Cambodia being a global culture is that that was represented potentially by Atlantis, is that that's what Atlantis was. It was that global civilization. From 14,500 years ago to 11,500 years ago, you have a series of about 3 events that led to the destruction of this entire global civilization.
Yeah, it's been great to get to know you over the last couple of days, man. Really enjoyed dinner with you last night, and
yeah, me too.
It's clear that you've got a huge passion for what you do. I was kind of curious, like, how did you start off in this field, and maybe even backing up before that, like, where'd you grow up, and what was early life like for you?
Yeah, I've had quite a journey in my life so far, Matt. I feel like I lived 2 different lives in within just this life. And what I mean by that, I don't mean like a deep esoteric way. I just mean that the first half of my life, I almost settled in for a different kind of life. I grew up in New Hampshire, a little tiny town, went to school, Plymouth State University, got a science degree, but I was always incredibly interested in the climatology and geology and ancient history and astronomy. There was a lot of areas that I was very passionate about. And when I went to college, I didn't know what I wanted to major in. I actually jumped around and had some different majors before I settled into an environmental science major. But I always had just fascinations and interest in so many areas. And I wasn't sure where that was going to lead. And what ended up happening was I ended up buying a house after college and got married and had a cat and a dog, and I was just, sort of hiking around and fishing in Maine. And I was on the path to have that kind of life. And that was not the kind of life that I wanted. There was an unsettling feeling of just having that life. It wasn't what I wanted. It was something greater that was stirring about ancient lost mysteries and secrets. And when I was living in Maine, I ended up working for, when I got out of college, I worked for a mapping company for 13 years. I'm a huge mapping geography nerd. That's one of my passions. In fact, when I was young, I was a really unusual kid who, instead of reading comic books, I was reading topo maps. That was fascinating to me. I would pick a region in the world, or in this case, usually like North America or the United States, and I would study the geography and the biomes. I was like fascinated. And I would say, like, what an amazing place this looks. Deep in the mountains in the wilderness somewhere. I'm like, I'm gonna go there sometime. And that was the kind of kid I was. I would walk around the playground and everybody was like playing games together, and I'm just sort of alone looking for like crystals and coins. And I was a very unusual kid, and most kids throughout my life like didn't understand me. I got pretty picked on and bullied a lot of my time in school, but I never really conformed to that kind of mindset or thinking. I was always just different and unique and unusual. And go forward, when I was living in Maine and I was working for a mapping company, I worked remotely for 10 years, which is a long time. And I was in a very quiet place, just out in nature in a house I had. And, there was no noise or anything. And I had this enormous amount of time, Matt. Like just time. And I think that's the thing that's most missing from people, is having a lot of time. And at first I kind of squandered it and really didn't use it very well. But eventually, over the course of the remaining 8 years, I realized that why not just turn this into an opportunity to have like my own little mystery school? Because I found my job to be so easy that it used such a small amount of my brain power that I would just multitask and listen to audio for anything I could, to try to learn So I went through like a whole 8-year plus period of my own little like fun curriculum on like a self, like, cause I felt like I really didn't get nearly enough out of college and high school that I wanted to really learn about things, learn about biomes, learn about the earth in different ways, learn about esoteric, learn about ancient civilizations. And that's when I started to get really into ancient civilizations. It was during that time period after I had honed in, exploring every topic I could imagine and trying to understand it in a deeper level. Like spent a lot of time with the climatology and ice cores, spent a long time with geology. But then I settled into ancient civilizations and lost history. And I found that because I had a background in a lot of those areas, it really benefited understanding. For instance, like when you're looking at the masonry of massive megalithic walls, in order to understand how they were built and the complexity that goes into them and the type of stone and how hard it would be to create them, you really need to have a geologic background. You can't just look at it and be like, well, I don't know what kind of stone that is. It matters. You really need to understand the Mohs hardness scale of things like andesite and basalt versus things like limestone. It's really important to understand because it gives you a way of saying, how could iron or Bronze Age tools have created these things out of this? The tools are far softer than the materials they're working with. And so here I am in Maine. I'm finding my greatest passion of all time. And it was speaking to me on a very deep level. And I was very much walking that walk of trying to explore not only just ancient civilizations and how they built things, but what their ideology was, what their mentality was. What are they leaving behind? Why do they build the temples in the way they did? Why were they aligned like they were? What was their purpose with consciousness and energy and, law of correspondence with the stars and the earth? It all became part of my path without even realizing it. And I was so far on that path that is ultimately what triggered and led me to want to just live a completely different life. And I was given that opportunity, and I feel unbelievably grateful that I was given that opportunity. And I ended up working. The opportunity was that I got a great job, especially at the time, working on and being like an integral part of ancient civilizations and other shows on Gaia. And so that allowed me to sell my house. I ended up getting divorced. I ended up starting a whole new life in Colorado. It's like most people don't start over again at like 36 years old or whatever it is, right? And I got to start over again. And that ultimately, from that point on, is what led me into everything that I'm doing now. It's a pretty incredible story, actually. That's really just the beginning.
When did you move out to Colorado? What year?
I moved out to Colorado in 2020, I think.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool, man. So you're just following your passion.
It's like, floating on the wind. I sort of just keep ending up somewhere else. Like I'm in California now. So I'm just keep floating and seeing where it ends up. But I very, very thankful for the fact that I ended up meeting an amazing man named Martin Young who saw the potential in everything that I was trying to do and unlock and really believed in me and allowed me to have an opportunity to live my dreams. And subsequently, in developing a very important documentary, which we can talk about at some point, but he was instrumental in me being able to visit so many of these sites that I had to study that I was working on, and then develop an entire team from around the world to come together to create a documentary unlike anything that's ever been done, with top academics in their field that are coming together to challenge the old paradigm and narrative of ancient civilizations. I do not believe anything like that has ever happened. And I think that because the reason is, it's not that there hasn't been a documentary with people that have come together talking, but top academics coming together to challenge the narrative, the status quo. And that is exactly what we're doing in a non-aggressive way and in a very open way. We work with archaeologists all over Turkey. We have some on our team. We are all about preserving the interest and respect of later ancient cultures that were in that area, but at the same time objectively exploring the possibility of an earlier lost civilization. And that's essentially what we're doing. So we're not trying to step on archaeologists' feet and be like, you guys are totally wrong. Like, come on, we're more like, hey, let's work together and What about these anomalies or these questions? What do you think about that? And so we've had amazing conversations with archaeologists. And even if you don't agree, there's no reason to not just have a great conversation around it and present your evidence.
Yeah, let's explore the possibilities.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how long has the team been together, and who's on the team?
So this has been an ongoing thing for the last year to a year and a half. It started with a very primitive means, and I've been unbelievably blown away by how it's escalated. And one of the things I want to say for everyone listening to this, there's been a lot of people who have contributed towards that, and I am so thankful for what you have done. It makes this whole thing possible. And so it started from a primitive means, and we only had a couple experts at first. And what's beautiful about the way that we're guided in life and the way that important things happen in a specific way when they need to is that we were actually unable to get permits in time. We were going to film last year. We had a much smaller core team of experts. We were missing a lot of the big ones that we have now. And it was beautiful because we didn't get permits, and we had to pull the whole filming trip at like the last minute, okay? But because of that, we ended up growing the team in ways that I could never have imagined. And the project grew, and it's in the most beautiful place now where it wasn't in before. And now we have like 9 experts, and we have some of the top experts in the world. Yeah, there you go. And so we have Dr. Robert Schoch, which is one of the leading, if not the most famous geologist in the world, who of course in 1990 went to visit John Anthony West and was the one who spearheaded the entire water erosion, the Sphinx enclosure, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And then we have Ömer Tanyuruk, who is one of the top archaeologists in Turkey working on Kefkalesi. So, I mean, that is a huge deal in itself. We have Hans Orheim, another archaeologist. In total, we actually even have a third archaeologist named Jennifer Deo, who is in the first part of the documentary. She's not on this, so we have 3 archaeologists. Then we have sacred geometry expert Robert Edward Grant. We have geobiologist Dr. Lydia De Leon, sacred architecture expert Arturo De Leon, and then a big hitter here I want to point out, Tausen Salem. This man was instrumental along with other people, and I want to give him a huge applause for everything he did to help us get all the permits we need. He was the discoverer in 1997. He was the discoverer of the underwater ruins under Lake Van.
Wow.
He is one of the most famous videographer, filmmaker, nature underwater filmmakers in Turkey, hands down. He's very famous there. And so he joined the team, and his collaboration has been huge in this project. And we'll talk about the underwater ruins and the diving we're going to be doing. And then, of course, Paul Wallace, who's a religious expert, and Brian Forrester, a megalithic expert. So we have an awesome team, just like legendary team
Powerhouse
here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, nice, man. Congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah. I want to be like Robert Schoch when I'm 85 years old or whatever. I mean, he is sharp. How old is he? He's a sharp
He's not quite
guy.
that old. He's
okay.
more like I think he's 70, but
oh, really?
We just got back from Peru and Bolivia. He's running around, hiking everywhere.
68. Why did I think he was so much older?
Yeah,
than
so he's not even 70 yet.
Yeah, okay,
he's running around. He didn't have any issues climbing like vertical ascents up to like Napa and Glacia and everything. So he's in great shape. I really appreciate Robert. He's definitely one of we have a great professional relationship of working together now for a couple of years, and I have a huge amount of respect for him. I'm looking forward to everything that we're going to do in the future.
He had a very impressive presentation at Cosmic Summit last
Thank
year.
you.
And he'll be Robert.
But
Robert was. But somebody told me he was older than that, and so this is why I need to vet things before I just repeat them.
Yeah,
on
his
camera.
work is pivotal and incredible. He's the only, in my opinion, extremely well accredited PhD academic with the kind of credentials he has of that high level who is challenging the narrative. And he has had a very tough road because of how much backlash he's gotten over the years because of this. Because remember, it's been 25 years since the Sphinx enclosure with water erosion. And so that's a lot of years to try to change a narrative and have a lot of pushback and continuous challenges.
It is for sure. So what are the next steps for the team then? What are you guys? What happens next?
So we got all the permits. Amazing, like it's such a dream come true to be able to do what we're about to do, and it is something that has never been done. Ionis, the Haldi Temple of Ionis, is one of the sites around Lake Vaughan, has never been filmed. It was just found in 2001. It's brand new. The underwater ruins have only had some scattered images, photographs taken of them, been a little tiny bit of footage on YouTube for that Tossin had put together, but for the most part, the world doesn't know about them yet. We will be the first to showcase these underwater ruins to the world and sites like Ionis and a lot of others around there. But it's not just focused around Turkey. It's focused around the connections and symbols that are in Turkey to Peru, Bolivia, Egypt, and Cambodia. And after we film in Turkey, we will be filming in Cambodia as well. We just finished filming in Peru and Bolivia, and we've already we started the filming in it was awesome. It's the Penn Archive Library. It's such a cool library. If you ever got a chance to go to Penn Museum, you can ask for a special invitation to get into the archive library. It is one of the most significant sources of ancient information and knowledge in all of North America, hands down. Penn Museum played a pivotal part in excavations throughout Turkey and Iraq in 1930s and up through the 2000s. And they subsequently have an enormous amount of papers and documents from those excavations there, which is why we went to go through their archives and start the documentary in a library, doing research that then expands out to the field and then explores incredible ancient mysteries and connections, but not just things that are like, wow, look, that looks like beautiful stonework. That must be lost civilizations. No, we're dialing this in to study ancient volcanic eruptions and sediment cores and the depths of things and the specific cuts and symbols and how it all relates. We're trying to get as much science behind this to bring together a non-aggressive attempt to help change the narrative of history. And so the next steps are in 3 weeks, literally from I think today, we are going to be in Turkey starting the most important filming of all, which is going to be by far the most challenging project in my life. I mean, we are diving down to the underwater ruins on Lake Vaughan that are 85 feet underwater. They are the deepest confirmed underwater ruins, confirmed, anywhere in the world, including oceans. And if for anyone listening to this, like they will probably say, what about Cuba? That's not confirmed. And that's a whole nother thing. But so we have a whole dive team. We're going to be going down to see these incredible ruins. We are going to be exploring extensively temples and sites that the world has never seen yet, and then places they have seen to compare. So that's what the next journey is going to be, and we're going to be. The hope is that the documentary will be released before the end of 2025.
Nice. Where's it going to be released?
Well, we still don't have a home yet. We're hoping for Netflix or Amazon.
Okay, cool. Yeah, but wherever it's going to be released, regardless of what I mean. You'd put it out on YouTube if it doesn't get picked up.
If we have to, that's the very lowest.
Yeah.
Option that we end up doing, but still, we can still have a huge success on that. So I'm not worried about where it ends up.
Nobody is. Yeah, people just want to watch it.
For anyone interested in obtaining or having that end up being somewhere, like we can wait until let them come to us.
Yeah.
We're not worried about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. No, that's exciting, man. Really pumped up.
Thanks.
So Cambodia, Peru. And then was there one more after that?
It's the filming is in, and this is actually unusual for documentaries in itself. I mean, we go from the Penn Archives in Pennsylvania, United States, to sites all across Turkey, including diving underwater, to Cambodia, and then it ends with Peru, and then ends with Bolivia.
Bolivia is last. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Cool, man. That's freaking cool. Let's go to Turkey maybe to start. Is that cool?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Yeah. I mean the Lake Vaughan situation. I mean, as long as you've kind of teased it and teed it up a little bit, I think people
Yeah.
want to dive in to understand what that is. And so this was a site you mentioned that was just more recently discovered within the last 3 decades, and it was kind of written off as being belonging to a specific civilization.
Yeah, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Okay, so we can start, I think, with the underwater ruins. I think a lot of people would be really interested in that, and then there's some other things around Turkey we can start discuss. But the reason I was at Penn. This is important to connect to that. The reason I was at Penn was that they have the excavation records from an ancient city in Iraq called Shuruppak. Shuruppak was the last city mentioned in ancient cuneiform tablets throughout, from the Sumerians, Assyrians, Akkadians, and Babylonians, all the various civilizations that have been in that area, and there's others too. But they left behind cuneiform tablets with incredible stories. So the oldest stories written, bar none, in the world, because paper lasts 500 to 1,000 years. Oral traditions are difficult to keep intact. They change over time. So the only way to leave behind a message for essentially an enormous amount of time is you can use a type of writing style called cuneiform, which is basically wedges in either clay or stone. And when you do that, you create a situation where it's indented into it rather than being on the surface, and doesn't wipe away or rub off like writing or a painting or whatever it is. And so it can last for 5,000 to potentially longer years. 5,000 years, depending on the condition of its preservation. Now, something really happened interesting with a lot of those tablets is that had huge fires in ancient Nineveh, this city that was there during deep antiquity, and the tablets were actually baked, which actually helped preserve them. And then they were buried. And so when a lot of these things emerged, there was a story that had come out of that, of this legacy of a great survivor of a catastrophe, a flood. And we know that in religious sects as the Noah story. And I want everyone to put that aside and just kind of ignore everything you've heard about the Noah story. That original story does not come from Christianity. 100%, you can look at all scholars agree. It comes from the Mesopotamian stories of a combination of, and it's like a rewritten over and over again in different versions of the Atrahasis, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and then other various versions of it in like Eridu Genesis. There's a whole background of different tablets that have basically the same stories. Legend of Itsubar and others of an enormous flood that is supposed to come and wipe out the civilization of the original Sumerians. And I had found what I believed was comprehensive evidence in these excavation papers at Penn of proof that the bottom layer that they had excavated of what they knew with the Sumerians was actually from a far earlier time. And the reason I say that is that they had found a massive alluvial flood layer right above the Sumerian layer below. And they had dug down the whole project. It was from 1931 in Iraq, and Penn had gone out there because they wanted to see if they could find Shuruppak, because it's supposed to be like a mythical city that wasn't real. It was like a biblical kind of text, kind of concept where it was wasn't a real place. Well, after going down through, they subsequently found the ruins of Shuruppak at 15 feet down. And in between there, they found evidence of 2 other civilizations above it. 2. And the one right above it, above this flood layer, was the time of Gilgamesh and the time of Uruk and all these different places. And what was so fascinating about this paper from 1931 is that here we have archaeologists discussing openly the idea that the original flood story from Zayasudra, his name was either Zayasudra or Untapishtim, depending on if you're in the Sumerian or the Akkadian versions of the stories. Okay, same person though. On whether or not that story of a biblical flood and a surviving and arriving in like the Ararat region of Turkey was real. And here we have the story being perfectly represented by what was in the field. A massive flood layer above it. Massive. It was like 4 feet thick, okay, of no human remains and no human evidence at all. Just massive flood. And then below it you have Shuruppak, and then above it you have 2 other civilizations. And they had discussed how there was really interesting similarities between the flood stories out of those tablets and what they were finding. But it couldn't be, because that was just a myth. Well, I realized that there was something tangible here. And so what I did was I started exploring the Ararat region to try to see if I could find a connection further to this that was real, because I was deep in the whole world of the cities mentioned, specifically when they were existing, and like putting this ancient story together. And what ended up ticking me off to that was a map called the Babylonian Map of the World. Have you heard of it?
I don't think so.
It's the oldest map in existence. It's a cuneiform map that was found in the 1800s outside of Sippar, Iraq. And they subsequently could not translate most of it because they were missing pieces of it. Okay? Long story short, thank you very much for bringing that up. And if what you can see is there's a set of circles in the center, and then there are triangles that emanate around the outside, almost like sun spokes, it looks like. Each of these triangles represents codex information for translating and understanding the entire thing. Well, in the 1990s, there was a woman who was doing an internship at the British Museum where this is housed, and she found a fragment that had been misidentified and put in the wrong place, which was one of those triangles. And when they put it together, they realized that it was essentially the codex key to unlocking the entire thing. Okay? When they did that, they realized that it was a map to different locations across the ancient world. And one of the triangles pointed towards and said, the land of Ararat and the Ark. And it gave specific descriptions for the length and size of the ark, and described it as truly there was an ancient cedar craft that was actually created, and that it on this map it showed where the location of it had landed, like a tourist map in the ancient world. And it had a lot of other locations as well.
And when was this created?
Well, we don't actually know when it was created. It was found in Sippar. It was the Babylonians, they call it the Babylonian Map of the World, but we don't know if it was the Babylonians that inherited it or it was an earlier, like the Assyrians or Akkadians, but evidence shows it was most likely from ancient Babylon. And this was what led me to continuing the evidence, like what had the Atrahasis had said and others about the Ararat region being some kind of a special place. Something had happened there. And this is what led me to exploring the Lake Von region, which is only, it's not a huge distance from Mount Ararat. They're in the same region. And that's what subsequently led me to just starting to study the sites around the region and learning that there were places that the world didn't know about that were just found. And as someone who has studied ancient megalithic masonry of high quality around the world and identified this like key telltale sign of different cultures based on their work, it immediately caught my attention.
Okay. So yeah, that's incredible. So then on to Turkey. Yeah. So you'll be going there in a very short period of time, and you're going to be exploring. There's a couple of different sites there.
I didn't even really talk about the sites. I was just kind of giving you the introduction.
Great introduction. I appreciate it. That adds a lot of great context. And so there's this lake, and maybe Ryan, if you can pull up a picture
Lake
so that
Von.
we can understand kind of the geography, because there's Lake Von, but then there's also some ancient ruins that exist right up
all around the lake and under it. Yes.
Okay.
So Lake Von is a pretty unknown place. Most people have never heard of it, despite the fact that it is one of the deepest and most ancient lakes in the world. Okay, it is over 1,500 feet deep.
Wow.
Making it one of the deepest lakes. I mean, Lake Baikal in Russia and Siberia is certainly the deepest. But what's really interesting about Lake Von is that I've spent a lot of time there, and there's fishermen that fish the lake that do depth soundings, and they swear that it is far deeper than that. And so as I started studying,
the ruins are near the edge, and they're more at about 85 feet.
The ruins are in the northern part of the lake, off of a town called the Jijivez, and there's an ancient site above it called Kefkalesi that's a really important site in all my research and the work and the filming. And during the research of all these places, the underwater ruins were one of the first places that I had come across in this research, and it blew my mind, because here at 85 feet deep are spectacular, what look like basalt blocks of a high level of quality that have been built and placed in what likely was an ancient temple that is, again, as I mentioned, the deepest underwater ruins that have been identified so far in the world.
And you're gonna be able to tell on this trip whether or not they're basalt or what?
Oh yeah,
what they are?
we're going to have geologists, we're going to have archaeologists diving. We're going to be diving down to explore them. So what essentially happened was in the 1990s, 1997, Towson Salin was diving under Lake Vaughan to study the microinvertebrates in the underwater life, because it's a very unique life. It's a lake. It's got these really unique features that no lake in the world has. For instance, it is the largest soda lake on Earth, meaning that it's like an alkaline lake that has no outlet. And that is a key feature that we're going to talk about in this. And so he's diving down, and he goes off of a town called the Gigevez in the northern part of the lake, and he finds and discovers these unknown, mysterious ruins under the lake. Now, I will caution you for what we're seeing on there. There are Armenian ruins of ancient Armenia closer to shore and closer to some of the islands, but there's also the different kinds of megalithic work deeper that you'll see. So there's different levels of ruins in Lake Vaughan. They're not all the same. The deep ones are the ones we're interested in. And so there they are. So Towson announces this to some of the world. It didn't really get too far out into the world. It's so unusual that archaeologists have no idea whether it's from the Urartian civilization, which is 2,800 years ago, or it was so confusing to them because of the type of architecture, they even thought it might be medieval. They were all over the place in their understanding of it. And at first, they actually didn't even believe that it was real. Towson was like, yep, I can show you the footage. And so, unfortunately, Towson discovered what I think was one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in history. And he didn't get really very much attention for it because it's not labeled correctly or understood. And so part of this mission of him being involved in this is so he can finally get the credit that he deserves for what he discovered. And that is part of what we're doing down here, because the science that goes into this underwater site may provide some of the most, if not the most, important evidence that we have had since the water erosion and the Göbekli Tepe dating to prove that these civilizations existed before the last ice age, before 12,000 years ago. And I can, of course, go through all that data with you and tell you essentially what we're looking at. But on the screen, you can see a capstone that on the top that the rest of them largely broke, where you can see 3 different versions of flower of life-like symbols on it, which is spectacular.
Yeah, it's incredible. Has the place been mapped at all? Like, do you know what the structures kind of form, what they look like, their shape? Was it like buildings? Was it what like?
They seem to be circular like temples, but other than that, it has not been extensively mapped. We know that the area that they cover is significant. It's over half a mile. It's very large.
Half a mile?
Yes.
Oh my God.
It's a huge area. It doesn't mean that they're all that kind of ruins.
Right.
There's blocks and things scattered. And you can see that temple has been significantly damaged. All of the stones on the top have broken off except for the edges. And the site itself
that looks like Peru, like how they come together with
Exactly.
with the angles, like how they made those triangles in between the rocks, and it's just the front that appears flat.
Oh, and it's beautiful, and it would have been perfectly carved. Let me give you an example. Look at how smooth the left side is and how the perfect joints, but the gaps are from earthquakes. There have been massive earthquakes. In fact, Lake Vaughan has significant seismic activity underwater. It has faults under the actual lake itself. And the area has had massive earthquakes. Even recently, the Temple of Haldian Ionis was significantly damaged by an earthquake somewhere around like 10 years ago or so. But so you can imagine at one point, all these stones were perfectly fit together. And you can see that on the left side, how perfect they are. There's literally no gaps between them. And this is not a type of technology that was available, as far as I'm aware. Any civilizations in the last 6,000 years did not have the technological means to be able to create the type of stonework and the type of work that we're seeing here.
So when was this above water?
Well, that's the whole thing that we can talk about.
Yeah.
And that is where it gets down to a fascinating scientific discussion. And if you want to talk about that right now, I can lay that out.
I mean, I'm good unless you think there's a better course to take.
Yeah. So this might be incredible for people listening to this who don't know. And I mean, you as a highly intellectual person will probably find this really fascinating. Lake Vaughan has had fluctuations in its history, but the significant fluctuations have been in paleo times. So we're in what's called the Holocene right now. We're talking pre-Holocene, pre-Younger Dryas, pre-Ice Age. The lake was very different. It was very different than it is now. And when I've done studies into the science of the lake, because the lake has actually been studied very extensively, as well as some of the volcanoes around it. There is a massive volcano on the southwest part of the lake called Mount Nemrut. And it's not to be confused with the Mount Nemrut that's in central Turkey with the big stone heads. There's actually two Mount Nemruts in Turkey, which is confusing. But this Mount Nemrut doesn't have any ancient ruins on it. But what it has is one of the largest volcanic calderas in the world. Basically, imagine a huge volcano. In ancient times, its entire top basically blew off. Something like Mount St. Helens, but even more significant. And yes, thank you. Massive caldera. And that shows you right there on the screen. In fact, it's such a big caldera and it's such an enormous volcano that it's been one of the most studied volcanoes in history. All the way back until the 1800s, it's been studied. And they've done a lot of soil sampling and analysis of the volcano, and they have a very, very good understanding of when its eruptions occurred, okay? They have a great idea of its history. And that became a pivotal part of this research because you can't date stone. So how you're going to prove lost civilizations' ages? Well, you need organic matter in most cases, but that's really difficult to find organic matter that hasn't been damaged or has been influenced by other things that have not allowed it to be a genuine way to measure ancient history. Göbekli Tepe was buried, so that was why they were able to date organic matter from that time period. Now, the next piece of evidence we have that is the only other thing really that's tangible is, of course, the Robert Schoch water erosion in the Sphinx enclosure, because there was no rain during dynastic Egyptian times. Well, this is the next one, because they know that Mount Nemrut's eruption, where it blew its top and exploded, occurred during the time period of the Younger or Older Dryas, meaning somewhere around either 14,500 years to 11,600 years. They mapped it out. They know that that's when it exploded, right? Which is so interesting because that's right during the volatility period of Earth that we study in ice cores and we see around the world, right? With this black mat and everything we see. So when I was studying the lake, I stumbled across something extremely significant. I find out that Lake Van has no outlet, okay? It has rivers coming in from the north and the east and the west, and but during Paleo times, during the pre-Holocene, before the Younger Dryas, there was one river, a major river that used to exit the lake in the southwest part of the lake, right next to Mount Nemrut. It was called the Murat River, okay? And the Murat River was what allowed the lake levels of Lake Van, to remain consistent, okay? Well, you find out that the Murat River was completely blocked off by the volcanic eruption of Mount Nemrut, okay?
12,000-ish.
12,000 plus years ago, whenever that was. And so imagine right now you have Lake Van and a civilization is there and they build this incredible set of temples and structures along the edge of the lake.
But
now,
the water was still coming in.
Well, of course, they would never build right where the water's lapping up against the edge of it. They would build in some beautiful place that they knew could survive a very long time and be important to them. Everything was that the ancient lost civilizations did was meticulous and perfect. Didn't seem like they did anything and made any mistakes, as far as I'm aware. So there was not a situation where Lake Van was like rising up every year and flooding areas and then dropping down. No, it was a very steady lake level of just normal lake fluctuations, right? So that's why they built it there. Well, in order for them to build at that location that they did, it's not that Lake Van would have had to been 85 feet lower. It would have had to been more like 100 feet lower or more, because these ruins are at 85 feet deep, right? Does that make sense? So what could account for a lake rising over 100 feet?
So you've got two rivers coming in. You've got one,
More than two, like many coming in,
and
right?
You've got one going out,
Yep.
and then the volcano erupts, and then it blocks the river that's exiting.
What happens to the water that's in the lake?
It just fills up from the
Like a bathtub,
from the
right?
two rivers coming in. Yeah, yeah,
Boom.
yeah.
How could you account for 100 feet rise in water unless you were to
Probably-
block off it's like a drain in a tub.
Right,
It's like plugging a drain.
right.
And that's exactly what happened. And so we have scientific dating that show when that volcano erupted and when the Murat River was blocked, proving that these ruins are at least 12,000 years old. And not only that, I have one more piece of evidence.
Yeah, but that explains how the ruins would be there if the ruins were really, really old.
Yes.
But how do mainstream science and archaeologists, or like, how do they explain how there's ruins down there?
They don't. They say that there's been fluctuations in Lake Vaughan over the last 5,000 years, but they don't explain the fact that you cannot have fluctuations that significant without some kind of a geologic event. And that's something that I've confirmed with other scientists.
So they don't know. They're just.
Oh, they have no idea. This is about to break, and it's going to be big. Now, not only this, let me add you another big pice of this. You ready?
Okay. Yeah, I'm ready,
Okay.
man.
So
My mind's still blown, but
they're going to add another piece of this. Is going to be wild to you. Now, in the 2000s, I think 2010, if I remember correctly, there was a whole team of scientists from around the world that came to Lake Vaughan to study its soil sampling cores from the lake because it's one of the most ancient lakes on Earth. Now, they recognize that because it's a closed basin system with no exit, that it provides a very unique opportunity for basically intact sediments that have not moved or changed in enormous amounts of time. So they recognized that. And so what they did is they came and they did a comprehensive core analysis of the lake. So they drilled down into the sediments all over the lake, and because they wanted to study the ancient climate. That was the purpose. Like a perfect way to preserve that understanding, right, is doing that. And what ended up coming out of that was totally unexpected. They ended up mapping out the Paleo Lake Vaughan in incredible graphics. And I'll get that over to Ryan as well. That was the only one I did. Thank you. Wow, Ryan is on top of things.
Ryan's good, man.
Good Lord.
He's the best in the industry.
Thank you so much, Ryan. That's amazing. So this is great that you found this. I really appreciate it. Now, what I want to explain to this for everybody is because remember, this goes along with the Mount Murat River thing so well that I feel like it might open up people's eyes and like blow their mind. So what you're seeing right now, everything, the map is showing a feature in front of you that has colors, right? So there's blue, and then there's like a yellow, orange, and then there's red. Now, everything you see that is encompassing the blue and the red is the current lake levels of Lake Vaughan. So blue is Paleo Lake Vaughan. Does that make sense? So pre-Younger Dryas Lake Vaughan is everything in blue.
So the entire image is today, where the lake is today. Is
Yes,
that what you're saying?
is the red, which of course the blue is still there because it's in the center.
Yeah.
But everything around it that's in the red and orange is the current lake levels of Lake Vaughan right now, today.
Okay. So it looks like ground right now, but it's lake on today. It's lake. It's lake today. So the water's higher than this today.
So the lake essentially more than doubled in size. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, what's so important about this to point out is a few things. Number one, this is an actual representation of how large the lake was during this time period, which would exactly coincide with the location of where the underwater ruins would have been built. And let me tell you where it was. If you look at the northern part of the lake, you're going to see what's called carbonate mounds. You see that? Now, if you go south of that, you see a peninsula sticking out in the lake. Okay, so there used to be two lakes.
Yeah.
Actually, not one. Now, imagine that was a land bridge right in between them for traveling and whatever.
Sure.
Now, the steepest part of that point off of Carbonate Mounds at the edge of the lake, you see it's like quite a mountain. It's a very steep, in fact, off of that point drops like 1,000 feet. It's unbelievable, the terrain there. But imagine, Matt, you're an ancient civilization. You're going to build anywhere on this lake. When you build on the most spectacular overlook on the northern part, right on a major traverse around it, that basically commands over the entire lake. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so there you have not only the geographic feature that would agree perfectly with where that location of the ruins is today, but I want to explain a couple other things.
So the carbonate mounds, is
Yes.
that? Yeah. So what is a carbonate mound?
Carbonate mounds are these giant features underwater that have been formed from like microinvertebrates and types of calcium and other sediments where, because there's a lot of limestone around the area, where they form these big towers of, like towers of organic matter. And that was the reason that Tossin Salen had gone down to dive there in the first place. It's one of the only, if not the only parts of the lake that have them. So it just so happens he goes down to film them, and Ryan, on top of things, he goes down to film them and he finds the ruins because of those. That's why he found the ruins. Okay? Now, if we can go back to that map really quick.
So this is organic matter that would have grown on top of
Like coral in the ocean.
Yeah. Right,
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, like coral in the ocean. Now,
Okay.
let's pop back to that map really quick, and I want to go over a couple things that are really important. So on the right side, you can see all these streams with dotted blue lines coming in, right? Now, everything that's dotted is ancient, and everything that's on the white is current. So the edge of the lake is where the blue solid line reached the dotted line with the red. Those are the shoreline today. But what's really important, if you're going to prove a paleo shoreline, the ultimate way to prove a paleo shoreline is stream channels, because streams can't flow through lakes. Currents can sometimes if they're powerful enough, but in general, if you have a stream, if you have basically it's like a riparian alluvial environment where you have like cobbles and stream evidence of a channel, it shows you that this is confirmed where the paleo Lake Vaughan levels were, right? That's important because it tells us the size of Lake Vaughan before the Younger Dryas, right? And on the left side, it even shows, even though there's no lake there now, they showed the extension of the Murat River on the left. They still showed it over there. See the dotted lines on the left. So what this basically does is it confirms every single thing with the theory of Mount Nemrut blocking off the Murat River, and it shows us, it basically confirms everything. The location where the ruins are would have been a spectacular spot to build. It shows where all the ancient streams came in, where the paleo lake levels were, and then also where the importance of the Murat River was. And why this is so important, Matt, is that scientists might have come back to me and said, okay, you have this theory of Mount Nemrut exploding and the Murat River, but what proof do you have of where the original lake levels were? Right here. See that? So ultimately, because of how much science has been done on this area, we ultimately found, I believe, exactly what we've been searching for so long, is tangible evidence to prove that this civilization predated the Younger Dryas catastrophes.
That's incredible.
What do you think about that, Matt?
I mean, it's incredible. So it's very compelling. It's very compelling. The rivers that are coming in now, so those rivers still exist today on the white?
Well, that's the whole point, is that on the white, you can see where they flow today. The dotted lines are where they used to flow. Now the lake flooded and grew in size, and so they obviously just flow into the lake now instead of flowing all the way to the paleo lake.
Mm-hmm. And so it's in balance, and it's not rising or falling. The lake is in balance today.
Because that's the current levels, because there's no outlet.
Right,
so the only way you have water exit the lake is through evaporational cooling.
Right.
That's the only way, which is minimal compared to,
Like, do we know how much there could be in terms of ruins yet? I mean, has it been really
just
like
barely touched, Matt? This is like uncharted territory.
That half mile thing could be miles and miles.
We have no idea if there's other ruins in other parts of this lake. We have no idea. It is really mysterious. We're starting with these underwater ruins off of Ajijavez, but I have a plan and a long-term goal far beyond the documentary of working with archaeologists and geologists and divers to further explore all of these sites using LiDAR and other technology to be able to expand on all of these things that are here. This is a life passion for me. I will spend the rest of my life studying the Lake Vaughan area.
Is there a way, like, could they drain, a certain part of the lake? You know, could you create some other lake next to it? Could you drain out the
What
water?
would be the
Is that-
purpose of doing that?
Oh,
Just
so
to
that you can
access them?
so you don't have to dive. So because I'm assuming that a lot of this site is probably, or a lot of the construction is probably under silt and sand and dirt.
You would environmentally, you would never be able to do that. You'd
Yeah,
be just
yeah.
disrupting massive
Way too
ecosystems
much
just
water.
by doing
This
that.
is a huge freaking lake, right?
It's massive. It's the lake is so big that you can't even. It looks like an ocean when you're there. It's massive.
So this
It's
isn't
huge.
like the pond outside of my yard. This is like how big would this lake
This
be?
is
in
the
terms of-
14th largest lake on Earth.
Oh wow. Oh wow. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
but it's
this
like the fourth deepest or third deepest on Earth.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's exciting, man. So getting in there and diving and trying to figure out what like what's going on. So yeah, what
That's just one part of the overall rest of the documentary. They're
Yeah.
very well done. Yeah, there you go. See, let's see the current levels today. Now you can imagine just that basin that's on the west side, just sort of like that whole west side part was pretty much the only part of the lake that was there.
Right. And what is this near? What other ancient sites are like not in the exact vicinity, but I guess like Göbekli Tepe
That's
is
southwest.
Southwest.
Yeah, it's what it is. It's its own set of ancient sites that I would say the only parallels and comparisons they have are to some sites around Erebuni in Yerevan, Armenia. There's a couple Susi temples and sites there, as well as there's a place northwest, 425 miles northwest called Altan Tepe that is also associated with it. This is Akdamar Island. This is an ancient Armenian church. So it's not the same time period. It's still amazing and really incredible to visit. But the what we're looking for is either deep underwater or sites around the lake. But it's beautiful. Look at the scenery there. It's like enormous mountains and volcanoes. And yeah, that's Akdamar Island. And that'll be one of the places that we, I'm sorry, that wasn't Akdamar Island, I guess. But we're going to be exploring a lot of those in the future. But there's a lot more. That's just the beginning. That's just the underwater stuff.
How long would it have taken for the lake to have filled up once the volcano blocked the water from exiting?
No one has actually given me an answer on that. I think if I was to just make a guess, I think it would be a couple hundred years. But I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question. It would depend on the amount of precipitation at the time and what the inflow is on rivers and things like that. Yeah. It's a good question. A lot more to uncover as we go, but this hypothesis is going to be thoroughly detailed and explored and presented in my new book, The Missing Key of History, that will be laying all of this out in the best way possible to create this hypothesis with as much evidence and data as I can.
So based on what you know now, I mean, is now a decent time to get into the connections that we see between what we know about this site underwater and other sites like Göbekli Tepe, like in the Sacred Valley in Peru? I mean, you see a lot of the same kind of architecture in the various spots. Is this a decent time to get
Well,
into
let me
that?
preface and just explain a couple other sites, and then I think it would connect to that
All right,
really well.
let's do it.
Well, the most direct connection to start with, just before we go to the other sites, would be Egypt. When you go to the Osirion in Egypt, there are these massive granite pillars that it's in like in a subterranean area, and on some of those walls are these incredible flower of life symbols that have 6 spokes around them on each one. And the 3, 6, and 9 are very sacred numbers, very important for all of these ancient civilizations and others. And the flower of life that was on that capstone underwater has 6 spokes exactly like the Osirion flower of life and others. And so, but that's not the only flower of life. There's 2 sites that are around those underwater ruins, in particular. One, Kefkalesi, another called Ionis, and then there's even a third called Shavus Tepe. And there are a couple others, but these are the core of what we've been studying and exploring for the documentary, and the symbols they have, from this giant T-pillar to this step pyramid design to the flower of life to the solar cross, right, that became the Knights Templar cross, to the pine cone and the cup and the chalice, and symbols like the dragon and the griffin and others. They're all there. And what we find is that it's this collection of profound symbols and knowledge that seem to then, and stonework with certain andesite and basalt, that seem to then pass around the world. So we were just in Peru and Bolivia, and you see the same designs. It's uncanny. It's amazing. The same step pyramid design Same type of T-pillars in Bolivia and Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, built out of andesite and basalt, just like that. Stonework at the Coricancha, extremely similar to the stonework at Ionis and underwater. The similarities are, their parallels are uncanny. They can't be explained, other than the fact that it goes along with the narrative, like Graham Hancock and others have said, that there was a global civilization. And I believe, and this is my theory that I will be exploring with dating, and of course we haven't even talked about other dating yet, but I believe that that distribution of that ancient civilization may have had its origins here, because I found evidence of the migration routes they traveled through other temples. Let me give you one example. There's
like
an amazing
like a capital city kind of a thing.
Yeah,
Or,
yeah.
Okay.
And there's an amazing site called Altan Tepe that is 425 miles away from this region. Okay, if you have a civilization, you emerge and you build, and you find the same temple with same stonework, same symbols, almost 500 miles away. That's not normal, okay? That's not normal. That's highly unusual. We're talking about a massive civilization on a grand scale. And that may have been indications of their movements and where they were going. Now, why is that location important? It's on what became the Silk Road. It was an ancient migration route. Thank you very much. Now, in the center of the screen, this is Altan Tepe. Most of this is Urartian and Roman building, but right in the center is a type of design that's called a Susi temple. It's right in the center of the screen to the left a bit. That is the original structure that was left. And that design is all over Lake Vaughan. It's a very important type of temple design, and that is what essentially we're exploring. Now, this site is going towards the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. And because it's nearly 500 miles away, the hypothesis that I have, along with an eastern route as well into Armenia and towards Asia, is that this civilization had reached incredibly high levels of sophistication. I mean, to the point where they seem to have not just a flourishing culture, but a dynamic and powerful and moving culture that was going to other places to spread its knowledge. And I believe that this civilization may have been largely responsible for becoming maritime and may have been a big part of this equation to understand for why Bolivia and Peru have so many similarities. Now look at this example. This is the Susi temple in Erebuni. This is in Yerevan, Armenia. And what I want you to pull up right after, Ryan, is pull up the Haldi temple at Ionis, and I want you to see the comparisons. Because, again, this is in Armenia. This is hundreds of miles away. Hundreds of miles away. Now, yeah, it's called the Haldi temple of Ionis, Ayanis. And when you see that, yep, that Susi temple, it's the same design, okay? Now, what's wild is that archaeologists have, do you see all the brown dirt above stonework you see right there, right?
Sure.
None of that is dirt. It's actually basically disintegrated mud brick. It's adobe work, and it's built on unbelievably fine andesite stonework underneath it, okay? Wow. And so clearly what I see here and many, many others do is that, like many other parts of the world, the Urartian civilization of 2,800 years ago seems to have found this site and then built right on top of it. And they built castles. That's what they were building, as castles.
Mud brick castles.
But because they built such big castles, one of these castles that was built on Ionis ended up collapsing and subsequently buried and sealed this site, preserving it better than potentially any ancient temple site in the world.
Wow.
It's one of the most preserved ancient temples in the world because it had a unique situation of being buried and covered up, and it wasn't found until 2001.
Wow.
So this is the newest ancient site of significance like this in the world. And I think it will change the world and change our understanding of history. What you see in the right side, that is an altar in the back that is made out of calcite alabaster. And they still don't even know where the quarry is for it. And all the stone around it is called andesite. And I want you to see the laser-like cuts out of that andesite. Now that
Andesite's
stone,
a very hard stone.
it's one of the hardest stones in the world. It's just below granite. It's a 7.5 to 8 on the most hardness scale at a 10. And it is extremely difficult to work with.
It's a lot easier to work mud brick than it is to work andesite.
Which is why they were working with mud brick and crude stone, limestone.
Right. It's incredible.
Look at the cuts.
I know you're going to tell me
Yeah.
that archaeologists and historians are going to credit this to the same group of people at the same time, right?
Oh, of course. They believe the whole thing is Urartian because
Right.
the Urartian left cuneiform in certain places. They wrote that they had basically, they were created grand temples and things. Now, I would strongly point out, thank you, there's your cuneiform writing. Now, notice none of the inner temple is any writing, okay? None of it does. And you're going to find a lot of inconsistencies where the cuneiform was. Now, anyone that's listening to this right now that has a background or an education or has studied this will automatically come back and say, well, Matt, you're looking at Ionis right now. It clearly states that Rusa II was responsible for constructing it. I will point out to you that in Egypt, we see areas all across the parts of the Giza Plateau and others with hieroglyphics that have been left from the dynastic Egyptians in which they carved into all kinds of existing older structures. Now, the best example would be the recarving of the Sphinx into a pharaoh head, which it had never originally had that. So when people come back to me and say, well, this cuneiform is written in this and this proves that they built it, I would say,
No, it doesn't.
slow down, hold on.
Definitely not proof.
We see, let's slow down and let's consider something for a second. In ancient Egypt, in the Great Pyramid, all of the pyramids, we find no writings at all, right? As far as we know, in any of these sites that we've identified as being pre-dynastic, pre-Younger Dryas, Peru, Bolivia, Baalbek, Lebanon, Egypt, Lake Van, Turkey, I could go on. We have never found writing, ever. They didn't do that. Writing was not their language to leave behind. Symbols were. What's the symbol of Baalbek, Lebanon? The swastika symbol. Long before the Hitler and the Nazis ever adopted it. It's a spiral. And in underwater, under Lake Van, that's that flower of life-like symbol on the right was also spiraled too, by the way, like that. Now, that means that that's their language to leave behind.
Right. So all of these sites all over the world that have no inscriptions on them, no written language, no hieroglyphs, no nothing, just symbols, just symbology. All of these incredibly well-built stone structures with precision that's beyond belief, where the stones are fitting together perfectly. You're saying that's from the same group, the same civilization.
It's like a signature left behind.
Right.
There's these specific signatures. I can go through a couple of them. The type of stone. This civilization we're exploring, like you are as well, we'll call them just the lost civilizations. They did not use limestone or any soft stones outside of insulation of the pyramids, bar none. Every single stone that this civilization used was either granite, diorite, andesite, or basalt. They didn't use anything else. Quartzite sometimes, depending on the situation. That was it. That was what they were interested with, certain mineral composition and whatever energetics it was. And in many cases, like in Egypt with the Aswan quarry, in parts of Lake Van with the basalt, they would go hundreds of miles to obtain these stones, even though they could locally just quarry whatever they wanted. And what's even more is that for the Urartian example of these sites, they never went and got those stones ever again. The bases are the only ones that have andesite and basalt. They rebuilt a lot of the temples, like Shavuz Tepe. Can you pull up Shavuz Tepe, Ryan, really quick? So in Shavuz Tepe, you see this classic example of the clashing between the different building types there. And in these examples, they had basically the Urartians were using the local limestone and the local stone to rebuild and build around these places. And they never had ever rebuilt with basalt or andesite in any of them. And so if they were the ones who built the lower bases, why would they do that? Why would they have this rapidly different style? And now one of the consensus that archaeologists and architects and people will challenge me on is they'll be like, well, Matt, I know what they're going to say. They're going to be like, it's pretty normal for building constructions in a lot of places to use stone on the bottom and then something more simple above it because of the base need to be stronger. I agree. But that doesn't prove that they created the base. It just simply doesn't. That doesn't mean that. It means that we have to explore for who created it, because the tools available to the Urartian civilization were Iron Age tools, and they would have been extremely difficult to even manipulate at all outside of like cuneiform writing alone. That's it. Because what is the telltale sign for a civilization is its advancement is based on how sophisticated its culture became. So if you have a culture that a civilization that's small and sort of fighting and has resources spent doing a lot of other things, they're not going to create beautiful stonework and things because their resources are spent. They don't have the capability. They don't have the expertise. It takes an enormously sophisticated civilization to have craftsmen of that level to do things like that and even have the means to do it. It takes an extremely sophisticated civilization. That's why when you look at the Inca, you look at the Tiwanaku culture, you look at the Urartians, you look at the dynastic Egyptians, they didn't have the technological sophistication to do any of those things. And we know that.
So if we pull up a map, maybe, like, I'm just curious, like...
Let's pull up Chavus Tepe really quick.
Okay, yeah,
I think that would be a really great example. So Cavustepe.
And I want to understand how far it is from these other locations.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I have a map on my website that he can actually pull up that shows where these are around Lake Vaughan.
Okay.
It's under the documentary tab. If you scroll down, you'll see maps that are right above the photos.
Okay.
Yeah, right there we go. So there's your map right there of Lake Vaughan, and then I have circles where Chavus Tepe, Ionis, and Kefkalesi are. Now the underwater ruins will be just to the south of Kefkalesi.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
So one of the things that I had to realize looking at that paleo map was that none of the sites, except for the underwater ruins, were actually built on the shoreline. None of them were, which is interesting to me, is that they were actually built further inland, which would explain why Chavus Tepe is not on the shore. See that? So Ryan, if you could go quickly to a Chavus Tepe picture, I wanted to just briefly mention on that. There's a great image there you'll see of the comparisons with the stonework. Now, anyone online that sees this immediately typically will be like, that doesn't make sense. Keep going. You'll get the Holiday Temple at Chavus Tepe. I think it's the one where I'm standing. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Thank you. So take a look at this map for a minute, okay? Here you have completely different levels of construction. Now, the first thing to point out before anyone automatically calls me out on it is, yes, there's limestone underneath the basalt. See how the basalt in the center doorway dips down below the other one? It's not perfect. It's because they reconstructed this.
Where do you say that again?
So you see how there's a massive piece of basalt where you would walk into the center, right in the center.
Yeah.
Now you see how it's not aligned with the stuff on the right and left side. It dips down below it. Because these blocks were reinforced with limestone underneath it, and the entire site was rebuilt.
When?
With the Urartians.
Oh,
now notice the stonework in the back and around it. It's all limestone. It's all the local limestone work. It's very crude work around it. And then here you have some basalt work that is, Matt, if you put your finger across some of those edges, you could literally almost cut your finger.
So they right. The
They're
sharpness.
Polished and perfect that these are some of the most beautiful megalithic masonry in the world at Chavus Tepe.
Why do you think that the original builders of it didn't first lay a base of limestone on the bottom? Like, why do you think it was
Because the temple was never didn't look like that. Those limestone blocks would have been placed down on the bedrock right below it, connecting to the limestone bedrock of the mountain. They always built to connect with the bedrock and the natural environments. And the fact that it's not on bedrock right now shows you that it was rebuilt. And the reason we know that is that there is another Holiday Temple that is right above it. There's always two. And the reason there's always two is that one always faces the rising sun and always faces the other one faces the setting sun. They're solar temples. They're based on the movements of the sun. Now, the Upper Haldi Temple, I don't think you're going to find pictures. It's fine. But it has, I identified it's all rebuilt with limestone. It has no basalt at all, except for there are hundreds of fragments. And some of them are maybe as large as, say, I don't know, like a couple baseballs, or maybe like a bowl, or just not huge, maybe, apple. But they have smooth, beautiful cut edges, right? But they're all broken. They're like, it's like the temple exploded. Now, Robert Schoch was exploring it with me, and he was talking about how massive coronal mass ejections can explode stone, blow it up, because of the amount of energy that gets all massively infused into it at a very quick interval. And you can literally blow up stone. The basalt is all in fragments that are nothing bigger than like a softball. What it tells us is that something catastrophic happened to do that. How would you have stones literally blown up like that? Like blown up, like it looked like someone brought an enormous amount of dynamite into the central site and just basically blew it up. Now, again, as I said, coronal mass ejection could absolutely explain that. We also have vitrification evidence at Kefkalesi that Robert Schoch has confirmed as well. That is from vitrification, meaning like a plasma strike. So we have evidence that catastrophic events occurred at these sites, from volcano eruptions to other things from the sun and massive earthquakes. And so what we're looking at is a situation where these ruins were, many of them were significantly destroyed. Some of them were better preserved. So it just has to do with each one. But they're just phenomenally incredible places.
Yeah, incredible. How long we've been going, Ryan? Okay. Do you want to take a quick break?
Sure.
Come
we can
back?
break and do the next one, Joe?
Yeah, let's do it.
That seems like a good break.
Yeah, I feel like it is. Yeah,
Yeah,
good.
sounds great.
Good. Okay,
cool.
All right, awesome. Welcome back. So, so I want to kind of paint the picture for people of this ancient lost civilization, and sort of, you're going to be exploring this incredible spot in Turkey. Can't wait to see what you get from that. But there's also additional sites around the world that, if your theory is correct, then all of these sites are connected, and it's all this one ancient civilization that had this ability to construct these incredible megalithic structures. And we see similarities all across the world, and it's very difficult to explain. What is some of that symbology that we see, and some of the specific construction styles that we see in other places around the world? Like how where are those, like the connections the most obvious?
Yeah. So when I was exploring these sites and try to get an understanding as deep as I could, they had these specific symbols, and some of them were actually physical symbols that had turned into large stones, and they were there was other symbols carved into blocks, but they all had similarities. They were all seemed to be telling a story. They were leaving behind information. So if Matt was, let's say you were an esoteric master, which you kind of are, and you were studying all kinds of things, and you were in charge of leaving behind the greatest message from your civilization, what would you leave behind? You wouldn't leave behind your shopping list for the store. You would leave behind the greatest knowledge that your culture had amassed, right? That is exactly what I believe these sites contain, is the culmination of an entire epic of our civilization that had risen up to grand levels, and then before they were destroyed, had left behind all of the most important knowledge and teachings that they had ever amassed in their entire time of development, and then they were wiped out, and now all we have left for their voice is the legacy of what they left behind here. And because the stones are so hard, they literally last the test of time. They don't really largely go decompose or turn into dust, or like the mud brick or adobe does. So in these sites, there are these very specific symbols. And that honestly has probably been the most challenging area to understand over the last 2.5 years of studying these. Is like, here you're presented with, and if I was going to take the whole list of all of them that are shown on from Kef Kalesi on the Kef bas-relief, and at Ionis at the Haldi Temple, and at Chavus Tepe with the big T pillar that we'll talk about. If you were to take all of those together and put them all in like a list, you have a pretty sizable list of very specific types of motifs and symbols, okay? Now, as I started to study those meanings, there were huge parallels for me that immediately popped up. Like the first thing is that you see Haldi, which is the equivalent of Enki for ancient Sumer in Mesopotamia. And if you want to think of another equivalent later, maybe like Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan in the Americas, or Viracocha in South America. Here you have Haldi shown on these reliefs, just with utter spectacular detail, not one mistake, beautiful, right? Passing the pine cone, right? Passing knowledge, there it is. Here he is, passing knowledge with what may be the first iteration of the chalice in his other hand, okay? And he's passing that. Now, what does that mean? Well, the cup or the chalice, if you do a search on your own, you'll find that it means passing a religious or spiritual doctrine. But what they're doing is they're not showing something literal here. Everything you're seeing is all hidden within symbolic, esoteric teachings. So if you don't understand what you're looking at, you won't get it. Now, let me just explain a little of this because you have it up and it's brilliant. You'll see that there's repeating symbols all over this. The first one is...
Tell me where this is again.
This is from the Kef bas-relief. It's a site called Kef Kalesi, which is right above where the underwater ruins are on a mountain. A spectacular mountain that overlooks the ocean. And this bas-relief in particular is in the Ankara Museum currently. It rolled down the hill and fell down, and they ended up finding it in the 1960s, and they subsequently put it in the museum. And there are others like this. There's at least 8 others that exist, but most of the others are severely damaged. Now on this, you can see in the center there is a tree of life. Now, the figure on the right is who's called Haldi, and he's standing on a lion. He's passing the pine cone, the seeds of knowledge, to it, okay? And he's got a cup in his hand. On the left is not the same figure. That's actually called Toshiba, and that is the storm god. That would be the equivalent of Enlil in ancient Sumer. And he is also passing the knowledge of the tree of life, but notice he's holding the pine cone in the opposite hand as well as the chalice, and he's pointing the pine cone slightly down. So they're not actually identical. At first you might look like they are, but they're not. Now, at the top of the screen, if you notice above Haldi and Toshiba, they have this very specific type of crown type of helmet that has horns on it. And we see that all throughout ancient Mesopotamia with the Anunnaki. Okay, so if many ways you could consider this just the Anunnaki, it's the same thing. And they're passing the ultimate knowledge to the tree of life. But look at the top of his head. His head is pointing to a very specific point, Matt. It's pointing to the central doorway above it in the step pyramids, the 3 of them. Now, if you notice that there are 3 regular pyramids and then there are inverted pyramids that fit right in above them. They represents above and below. Okay, they're like realms of existence or reality. And this motif, as I started to study it and then spent subsequently the next 1,000 hours, probably over the next 2.5 years, I realized that this contained some of the most profound knowledge I had ever seen in my life. Now, you want to talk about hidden secrets and hidden motifs in this. It took me 2 years to realize that those tetrahedrons above their head form flowers of life patterns over and over again. If you don't look at it in just the right way, you won't see it. But if you look at it with certain eyes, you'll see that it's a repeating 6 tetrahedron spoked flower of life symbol over and over again at there. It's encoded in it. You almost don't even see it at first. And then above it, you have 3 doors, okay? With 3 step pyramids, with the central door having this fleur-de-lis-like symbol of higher balance. And below, in between the 2 eagles that are guarding each side, you see what would become like a cross. It's like a diamond cross in the center, okay? Basically, this represents everything. It's talking about the harmony and balance that exists here on Earth as well as the cosmos. It's talking about basically the design and blueprint behind how everything functions and runs. So if you imagine Earth and the fact that everything is balanced. On the left, you have the storm god right? So he represents the polar opposite of Haldi on the right. So Haldi on the right would be the preserver of knowledge, divine wisdom, and preservation, okay? The character on the left is the god of storms and destruction, okay? And death. Now, in the center, you have the tree of life. Now, this is going to blow people's minds. This iteration is what became within Vedic and Hindu cultures known as the Trimurti, okay? And you know that as the three gods in the Vedic cultures of Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, okay? The three, always shows it as three heads in ancient Hindu cultures. What does that represent? Well, Brahma represents God, okay? And Vishnu represents the preserver of knowledge, and Shiva represents the storm god or destroyer. It is identical. Now, in this case, Vishnu would be Haldi on the right, Shiva would be Toshiba on the left, and then God or Brahma would be the tree in the center, nature. Okay? So they're talking about basically not just the balance that exists here on Earth, thank you, but they're talking about the archetypal celestial intelligences that maintain that balance. And that's, of course, a very complex area to get into. But the point is that here you have these specific symbols on this bas-relief that we then find in gigantic form in other places that are taken out of this. So I want to point a couple of them out. Can you zoom in on that bas-relief again for me? Now, you'll see these little T's with 3 indentations everywhere. Thank you. All over the place. In the center, there are 3 above the tree of life. In front of Haldi, there are 2 above the pine cone, 1 below, 2 behind him, and it repeats over and over again, okay? That T, we find that same T in Göbekli Tepe. We find it in Menorca. It is a completion symbol. The T is a completion, and we're gonna get into where we find that in South America in a second. Now, remember the way that T looks. Remember the way the step pyramid looks. Remember the way the inverted step pyramid looks. Remember the doorways. Remember the pine. Try to remember all of that stuff. Now, can you pull up the T pillar from Chavus Tepe on there? And if I think you have it. If you don't, I can get it. So the same T is. Let me just send that. I don't think he has it. The T pillar that I found at Chavus Tepe, I'm gonna get that over to him. I think he's gonna need it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a comparison and show you some of the symbols and some of the similarities. So on the right, what you have is we're looking at the site of Pumapunku in South America, and this is in Bolivia, and that is andesite stonework on the right. Now, I don't have the direct comparison right. I'm gonna send it to him so he can put it up right now. But that essentially, that symbol is you'll see that it's the same as the T in the bas-relief, but there is a whole nother set of them from Chavus Tepe that looks even more similar, and that's what we're gonna pull up right now. So let me just pull this up really quick.
While you're doing that,
yeah.
Do you feel like Stonehenge is a part of this civilization, or is that after?
I think that all those civilizations that did more primitive stonework are after.
After.
Yeah, and it's because they had knowledge of before and how to do certain things, but they had limitations, I believe. And I think that those limitations, I'm going to send right now. So I think that those limitations are largely what prevented any of those later cultures after the Younger Dryas. Because I think all those cultures are after, from obtaining the level of quality that these civilizations and the stonework and what they were able to do. Okay, so he's going to pull up the image in a second. Basically, what it is there it is. Okay, so at Chavus Tepe, which is the site we showed the stone masonry work just a little bit ago, you have these massive T-pillar, basalt T-pillars that are scattered across the site. And I've counted 7 of them at this site, and there's one in the Vaughan Museum. And they're still buried. If you can blow that up really quick, that's the focus on that one. Yeah. So these are incredible. They weigh between 5 and 7 tons.
Wow.
Unbelievable. They're way bigger than they look. They're like maybe 4 feet tall. They're enormous. They're huge. And they're scattered across this field, and they're not incorporated into any of the Urartian stuff. They're just partially buried, okay? Clearly left behind from an ancient time. Now,
Basalt, I guess, right?
yes.
Yeah.
So take that symbol with 3 level indentations in it with the T, and now compare the one at Pumapunku in Bolivia next to it. When I was studying these, and I was also studying other parts of the world, when I saw the similarities with these symbols, I knew 100% that it was not an accident. It was impossible. I mean, if you had disconnected civilizations across the world, it would have been impossible to come up with the same symbols to mean something. And some people will be like, well, they're both looking at the sun, so they come up with a sun symbol, not like this, not complex symbols that are that have esoteric, mystic properties, okay? That would be, yes. So here's Dr. Robert Schock analyzing these and standing next to him. Now take that one and compare the one with Bolivia that's behind the other one, and put them both next to each other. And I want to show that just how incredible this is. There we go. Yeah, thank you. Put those 3 next to each other. Now, if you look, it's as though they combined 2 different symbols here. They took the T-pillar with the same concept, but then they took the inverted step pyramid and they added it. Why? Well, the inverted pyramid represents heaven or the cosmos above, and the non-inverted pyramid represents earth, right? Or this realm. It's like above or below. Now, in Pumapunku, you find out that it's all based on astronomy. Basically, the whole thing is an astronomical temple, okay? And so it makes sense that every single time they show the doorways in Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, it's always inverted step pyramids at the top of the doorway, because they're talking about the doorway of basically source or God, creation, the source of everything, the beginning, the balance. And that's why they have it like that. Whereas the balance, the symbol that we see at Chavus Tepe on the right, what we're seeing is the balance of the all. So it's not even just talking, it's because it doesn't have the step levels, we're looking at the balance of the all. And it's the balance of above and below. And that was very important to their understanding. They didn't just simply see the earth and the cosmos as a random place. They saw it as an organized, highly intelligent universe in which there were celestial, archetypal creators that are part of Source who maintained that balance and harmony. But not only maintain that, maybe responsible for the lowering of kingship and creating civilizations throughout history. Our story seems to be integral to them. And in many ways, we seem to have some kind of a connection or relationship with them on a deeper level as well. And that's a whole nother conversation, but the similarities with this are incredible. Now, if you can pull up for me Napan Glacia from, if you can pull up Spring of the Nusta from Ollantaytambo, it's the stone spring with the water flowing over it, and then the bas relief again. I want to show that comparison as well. Yep, so keep that with the pyramid. I need the step pyramid above it. There we go. Okay, now go up a little bit above his head to the step pyramids that are right above him. Yep, go over to the right. Those are broken a little bit. Thank you. Okay, so this is a super important concept. Not only is it the 3-level step pyramid, but it's 3 levels within it. You see that? So the Spring of the Nusta on the left, you have 3 levels and then 3 levels and then 3 levels. And then within it, it's all compounded on 3 over and over again. And then right at the top of the balance point is the sacred spring flowing over it. So this kind of stuff, these examples help us to understand what they mean, because we know that this is a sacred spring of the Inca and pre-Incan civilizations of Ollantaytambo. In fact, they may have only built that entire site because of this there. These springs were they're sacred to them. They were like divine springs that had to do with nature and the earth, which is a feminine energy. And so when we take that on the left and we say, okay, so this forms half of the Chicana design. You ready for this? The Chicana design is the most important symbol by far in South America. And here we have what is likely the origin points of the entire Chicana. And we haven't even talked about the origin points of the cross at Ionis yet. But take a look at that. If you take that step pyramid on the right and you take the one that's inverted, you see that? And you combine them, you get the Chicana. You see that? Because you would take and you would create a division between above and below, and that's why the Chicana has the divider between the steps above and the steps below. Can you pull up, Ryan, just the classic Chicana design for me from South America? So while he's talking about that, but that symbol is sacred to South America. It's everywhere, right? It's their most important symbol is the Chicana. And that design is, I believe, largely originated from Lake Vaughan, okay? And it's why it's so profound, Chakana. That is where we get one of their most important symbols of all. Thank you. So click that gold one right in the center. There you go. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, max that. Put that up next to all three of these. See that? Look, it's the origin of everything. That Chicana design with, now you see the level that separates the two step pyramids. That's basically the division between heaven and earth, cosmos and earth. And they're basically showing the balance of all. It's like, it's not just here and it's the all, it's the universe. So that symbol represents, you can create a cross in the center if you draw a line from above to the bottom, to the left, to the right, and you'll realize when we go look at the Ionis cross that they really are all related. They're all the same thing. It's talking about the ultimate balance of everything, okay? Of cardinal points, northeast, southwest. Now, you see that step pyramid on the right from the bas-relief from Kef, and of course, there is the same design in Ollantaytambo with the sacred spring. Now, because the spring is flowing over the top, we know that it represents basically harmony, balance, and fertility, right? So that same concept of harmony and balance is echoed all throughout everything we see here. And that's an important concept to understand that I don't think we fully do today. Do you know what I mean by that? So let me say what I mean by that. We exist in a very strange materialistic world where most people do not value the earth and nature and the cosmos and the role that we're playing here. And more importantly, I think there's a lack of understanding of what goes into maintaining that balance and harmony here. For instance, everything is perfect, right? We have the perfect amount of wet and then dry to create environments where vegetation can grow and then drop its leaves and then create sediments and nutrients to then create more life. Things grow and then die, but then those things that die then help fuel the things that need to live. But that balance of all of those things is maintained by these guardians. That's essentially what we're talking about here. Look, there's eagles guarding both sides on the left and right. Now, the meanings behind those gets profound. Is that an area you want to talk about? The meanings behind the three doors and the three windows?
We could. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of other stuff. I'd love to connect some other like ancient sites to this. And so what I want to do is paint a picture for people of this entire civilization and where it existed around the world. Sure. And maybe some of the other, like I want to get to Egypt at some point and talk through some of that as well.
Well, basically just to end out on Peru is that in Bolivia is that in Tiwanaku, you have these massive, and Pumapunku actually, there are gates of the sun. There's actually, I just got back from filming there. Most people don't know, but there's many more than one gate of the sun. There are like 4 that are sitting on their side at Pumapunku. Anyway, they have 3 doors, just like that. 3 doors on the backside, 3 step pyramids, and it's the same type of T-pillar design in the center, with the center door being basically source or God back to creation. And either door on the left and right, they represent the microcosmic relationship between the macrocosmic. It's all fractal relationships between us, okay, right? So mind, body, spirit, with the balance of like the trimurti I just explained also, which is like, nature or source with creation, preservation, and destruction. And then the whole concept of the cosmos version, which is basically like the mind of God or the word, and then the metaphysical, spiritual realms, and then the physical realms. So all 3 are echoed over and over again in all of these concepts. But I just wanted to show that because Here we have profoundly divine knowledge that's being shown in different parts of the world, which is incorporating basically the same symbols. And there's others we can go investigate now too.
Yeah, cool. Let's do it.
Okay, so the first place I want to go is go ahead and leave the step pyramid design up right there and pull up the Cambodia picture I showed. And this is just fascinating. Thank you. Okay, so this is not something I've ever talked about. This is brand new. I don't believe anyone has connected this yet. In Cambodia, there are two massive temple areas. In fact, some of the largest temple areas in the world. There's Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom. It's massive, massive, huge moats. And those civilizations that were there have beautiful construction and architecture, but there are two temples in particular within Angkor Wat and Thom, within the Siem Reap area, that contain the same step pyramid design. And we're talking about opposite ends of the world. So here we just showed you those designs in Peru and Bolivia, and now here we are across the world in Cambodia. And look at what it is. A doorway, right? With indentation levels, and then the step pyramid design right above the top.
So show Ryan, if you can, pull up Cambodia on a map just real quick so that we can see how where it is and how close it is to these other places.
Okay, yeah. So can you pull up Angkor Wat or Angkor Thom in Cambodia? We can take a look and check it out. But what we're doing is we're essentially putting together bits and pieces of connections to this civilization that seem to go global.
Yeah.
Like completely global.
Right.
And I think those are the things that we need to be dialing in with, because I think it helps us to understand that this civilization that was here, that we no longer understand and remember, they were masters, and they had mastered aspects that we have very little concept or understanding of.
Right.
If anything, I feel like we're like children in understanding compared to them.
Yep. Okay. And in India as well, do you think some of that stuff
Absolutely.
in India, yeah, some like the carved out of the mountain?
Kailasa Temple and Ellora Caves and many other parts of that, they're just different iterations on how those civilizations wanted to build. They all have something similar. India, of course, contains situations where there are structures that would have been impossible by just regular tools and by hand. Same thing. Instead of building temples, they built cave temples in a stone. It's just their own style.
Bar caves.
Yeah. And then, give you an example, Madain Saleh. Have you ever heard of Madain Saleh in Saudi Arabia?
Yes, but we haven't talked about it much.
Madain Salei. It has the same step pyramid design above the doorways, but it's
Really?
inverted.
Okay.
And it just keeps growing. So you have Cambodia, and then you have Saudi Arabia with the same step pyramid design present there as well. And then in Egypt, really what we're connecting in Egypt.
Yeah,
there we go.
There we go. There it is.
Okay.
Wow.
There it is right above it. Now look, it's the inverted pyramid, like I said. Now, what does the inverted pyramid mean? The inverted pyramid means heaven or the cosmos above. Now, you'll notice it does not have 3 levels of the Chicana. The step pyramid design had a slightly different meaning here. So they were representing something similar, but it was their own take on it. So when you look at the levels, let's see how many are there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so there's 5 levels on this, or 4 if there's a divider, depending on that. And of course, their understanding of 4, 4 is basically the all, like the cross, and the balance of all. But again, these sites are so mysterious and enigmatic. We have no idea who built these gigantic mountain temples in the middle of the Arabian desert.
You do.
Well, maybe so.
But that one looks kind of similar to the one that I mentioned at dinner last night I guess it's Olante Tumbo as well, right?
Yeah.
On that massive granite, like those 3 granite walls that that are stacked. What would Ryan pull up to pull that one up?
If you just look up Ollantay Tambo, it's basically the upper solar temple area it's the most famous site. It's like basically these massive 6 stones with these kind of faded Chicana designs right into it.
Yep.
And that absolutely mirrors all of this.
Right.
It all does.
Right.
I mean, so what are we looking at? What are the chances this is a coincidence? It's impossible.
Right.
And we're looking at.
And where is this?
This is Saudi Arabia.
This is Saudi Arabia too.
We're looking at what I feel is that it's not like this civilization was traveling and then coexisting in the same places. I don't think it was that at all. I
Right.
think they were traveling and teaching
Right.
and creating civilizations that could then emerge in their own way with their own take, but built off of the basis of what that higher knowledge was that we shared everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Saudi. This is in the middle of the desert, right?
In the middle of the desert.
No, nothing around there.
There's literally one of the most remote
There it
parts.
is.
Yeah. And so there's Ollantaytambo, and you can see in the center stone, and there's more stones. There's pumas, and there's this. It's basically 3 sets of pumas, 3 sets of chicanas, 3 sets of pumas over and over again. It's just repeating itself over and over again. And by the way, each of those stones weighs like 50 to 100 tons.
They're insanely huge. There's no people standing there, but the people go, you know, you're a little bit taller. You're taller than the rope. You're like 2 times where the rope
Yeah,
is.
we just filmed there.
Yeah.
And absolutely incredible. Peru and Bolivia is amazing. There you go. You can see that. I mean, try to imagine.
They're like 15 feet tall, though. If you go stand, the people are closer to us, so they even look bigger than they are. But
oh,
like,
they're just huge. But just imagine like the Incan
massive.
civilization who only existed for 400 years.
Yeah.
400 years.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
The entire
Right.
culture existed for 400 years, and we're told that they somehow reached sophisticated heights to build and move and do these. And I can tell you that that is not enough time.
Yeah.
It's not enough time for a culture to become sophisticated enough through its masonry and its cultural side to create things like this.
Right.
They wouldn't have the technological means or the ability to do that, which is why I think, without a doubt, this is just an example of the Inca adopting other sites, just like the Urartians, like we were just discussing a minute ago.
Yeah, you can see the Inca work on top of a lot of the stonework. that's out
Classical
there.
Inca work. It's just
Yeah.
primitive stonework.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
really, really rudimentary
Yeah.
compared to everything else around it.
It's very compelling. It's very, very compelling. And yeah, let's take a look then. This so out in the middle of the desert we're talking about with this. With
Very
this
remote,
image.
too.
But
Very remote.
But maybe 15,000 years ago, you're talking about a lush green.
Well, but here's the thing that's interesting about these places. Some of them may have been, the purpose may have been for a journey. So don't underestimate. I don't think a civilization was living here. I want to be super clear about that.
Okay.
I don't even know if there was water here either. Just because they were there doesn't mean that. I think it was something else. I think what we're looking at is a very important area that they felt maybe energetically, maybe ley lines, maybe whatever it is. I think that they went out in the desert and made these as retreat type of temples to go and have mystical experiences for priests and kings and royals and those of high stature.
Interesting.
Because a lot of these temples seem to be built up on mountains and you had to go and get to them. And I think with everything that we learn, you find out that the journey of people going to seek these locations that are remote, deliberately remote, to have spiritual and deep journeys and experiences was a very big part of this.
Do you feel like this is water damage here that we see in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia? Like,
Oh, without a doubt, those are giant waves.
Back
Those are
out,
when
Ryan, back out.
basically the Mediterranean flooded during the Younger Dryas and Older Dryas with the Red Sea, and basically had massive tsunamis sweep across both the Sahara Desert and Saudi Arabia. That's why the sand has these fluvial looks to it, especially if you go west of Saudi Arabia towards the Rishat structure in Mauritania. You can see massive alluvial flows. Yeah, right across the Sahara up there. Huge outflows where you can see it came from Tunisia and basically flowed through the landscape.
But that's, I mean, do you think it was that recent? You think Younger Dryas, or do you think
That's still 12,000 years ago.
I know, but
That's a long time ago.
yeah, I mean, ish, but yeah, okay.
I think, okay, let's put it this way. I think time is largely underestimated by most people. Time. I want to give you an example. Like when we think about everything that we've accomplished since medieval times, swords and fighting in castles and stuff, that's like 700 years. 700 years. Try to imagine something 12,000 years ago. It is an enormous amount of time. So we don't want to underestimate how long that is to leave behind things like that.
Just a question for you
Sure.
real quick. Ryan, pull up my iPad. So what we see is in Africa, we see this evidence of this massive amount of water
Yes.
coming up onto
Yes.
the land here. it's going over even spots by like Imikusu where you've
Yeah, you can see where those terrain blocked sediments and created channels.
Right.
Right there,
right.
clearly. Yeah.
And it's very clear that this is water, not wind, but everybody
Yes.
says that it's wind. And then you've got these salt deposits all over the place, which ocean water, right? I
Exactly.
mean,
They leave behind the salt, they evaporate. That's why there's whale bones. there.
exactly. And but the whale bones are dated to millions of years ago.
Well, but there's then some shells and some more recent things that have been found in those areas
Yeah,
as
so
well.
a lot of those whales have feet on them, they're millions of years old. But it's just interesting. Like the timing on when it happened for me is like still a bit of a mystery. And then when I look over at North America, and I made a video on this, and Ryan and I recorded this, and you see the same salt deposits here in Salt Lake City in Utah. You see how the western part of the United States just looks like it was bombarded by a huge freaking wave.
It was.
Yeah.
But it wasn't from the same source.
Okay.
So the waves that hit Saudi Arabia in the Sahara was from a different scope and source than North America. And of course, Randall is the ultimate expert on the great floods that you can call them the Missoula floods.
But his floods are coming from up here. His floods are coming from north, and it's fresh water.
Yes.
What I'm talking about is salt water that would have come from ocean.
But they were oceans.
What's that?
The entire Rocky Mountain Basin was an ancient ocean. That's why you can go up to 14,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains and find seashells at the top.
Might be why. But Randall's saying that the melting happened of the ice caps at a very fast rate, and that the ice caps, which are not salt, melted extraordinarily fast and created the, just like a lot of the flooding that we see. I'm suggesting something different, which is that
Tsunamis, right?
just one giant 10,000 foot tsunami.
But both likely happened.
Yeah,
that's the whole point.
I think so too.
Is that we're looking at periods of absolute catastrophes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That were over two different periods, and we're getting the dating. We'll talk about those two different events. But when you get a huge influx of water that moves from earthquakes that are staggering, you're going to get tsunamis that are going to travel around the world and impact places in different ways. Okay. In different ways. And in North America, I don't know if there's any concrete evidence enough for a tsunami there, but I can tell you that we know that there were massive floods on a biblical level in their own way from the Laurentide ice sheet melting and refreezing and then melting again.
Yeah.
Rapidly.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, the evidence that I presented was it explains a lot of like this stuff that you see with, this massive salt deposit, with how the land seems to have just been pushed back by the water over here and just kind of has all these wrinkle marks. I mean, it's how this has been kind of spread and smoothed out into the ocean, which would have been land here.
That's the shelf. So that's the North and South American continental shelf. That means that before the last ice age, that's where the land extended to. Did you know that?
Yes.
So if you go north from South America and off of North America, the entire shallow shelf was where the land used to be.
For sure. Yeah. And like Florida.
Yeah. So you can see that really well.
This would have been above water.
Yes.
Obviously, So yeah. I just see all over the earth evidence for water coming from the west to the east, including right here, that would have been, water would have traveled around Antarctica like that, and you can kind of see that exact angle forming right there. You see just all the salinization from what would have been salt from where the water busted through here. You've got a lot of evidence of salt and, like you said, shells in various parts. So I feel like some big event that caused that could have also been the same event that caused this over here, and potentially turned Saudi Arabia into a desert and through salinization by having so much ocean water, just pile onto what would have been a fertile green land when that structure was there potentially. So
I think we're looking at 3 to 4 different events in the last 50,000 years. And I say 3 to 4 because some of these time periods had more than one event associated with them. You'd often, during these catastrophe periods, and there's various reasons of why those occurred, it looks like you had major events on the front and the end every time. The front and the end, and then in between there's volatility. And that's a whole conversation about the difference or what happened during the younger and older Dryas, but also what happened during an earlier time period known as the Lachamp event or Adams event earlier, around 42,000 years ago. But we're talking about multiple series of catastrophic events in which massive die-offs of megafauna on the scale of catastrophic scale of millions died in both the northern and southern hemispheres during certain intervals of that. And we're talking about some of the hardiest animals that the earth has ever seen. That for them to go extinct shows you the extreme level of what these were.
So tons of evidence in Egypt as well, and so we see it again. This civilization didn't carve; they didn't use hieroglyphs. They didn't have writing. They weren't writing. They were using symbology. So within the Great Pyramid and the pyramids, the red and the bent pyramid, we don't see any writing that was original to that time. And so
exactly.
So I think that's critical for people to kind of realize that these structures don't contain that sort of writing.
They could, because I think that language, I don't know how they communicated. I'm assuming they talked, but I'm not going to speculate to say that they had a language they didn't leave behind. I don't know, but I can tell you that what they left behind are two things. They left behind the stonework that they know would last forever, like the pyramids, and they left behind, in some cases, the symbols that were carved into them. Believe it or not, symbols carved into these stones tend to be a little more of the exception as well. In most cases, these beautiful stones, like we see in the Valley Temple in Egypt, don't have anything carved. There's nothing at all. So it's either symbols, like in Peru and Bolivia, and in Turkey and Lake Vaughan, a little bit in Baalbek, Lebanon. But then in a place like Egypt, it's like, in most of it, you don't even have anything. Like, for instance, the comparison we were talking about with the Osirion, with the flower of life symbol that's there have been some very interesting studies that have been done where certain experts have gone and looked at the flower of life that's in the Osirion and have said that it's not carved, which is really weird. It's not drawn onto the surface, but it's not carved and embedded into the stone. Thank you. It's, from what I've been explained by certain experts that have studied it more than I have, is that the flower of life in the Osirion, they see that it's not even burned in either. It's like the mineral structure of the stone was altered to create the symbol and the shape. Some kind of an alteration of the mineral composition of the structure. I'm telling you, it gets really wild, but I think that these need to be studied more because there's nothing like this that I know of in the world.
What does ChatGPT say, Ryan, when you ask how that was created? Can you ask that question?
They're really strange, and again, like I said, people have studied them and looked at them, and they're like, this is weird. It's not embedded. It's not drawn on the surface. It's lasted for over 12,000 years. It seems to be. It's almost like if the rock had a skin, it's like below the skin. It's really hard to explain. But that's what I've been told and explained by a lot of people who have studied that are pretty credible. And I won't mention their names now because I don't have permission to, but that's what their perspective and opinion is on the Osirion flower of life symbols there. But it's really bizarre. But again, that same symbol we find under Lake Vaughan on the capstone. It's not a coincidence.
So they don't know. They don't know. They're saying that it happened later because they don't know how it was done, and it was likely carved or etched with iron tools or burnt into the stone with acid or pigment.
They don't know.
Either iron or burnt.
It's the opposite of each other.
It's not what.
Let's just throw a bunch of things out and see what sticks.
Since we don't know, it's got to be the Iron Age or something like. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
I know. They don't know.
That's incredible.
Traditional archaeologists have no comprehension of how these things were done.
Yeah.
They just don't.
Yeah.
And like in the Lake Vaughan thing, they have no way to explain why
Right.
that's 85
Right.
feet deep.
Right. It's like the water erosion on the Sphinx, that because they know that there wasn't water, it wasn't lush, it wasn't rain. They say it's wind, but it was covered with sand for since that time period. So it's like, how could the wind have caused that erosion? Wind doesn't create a vertical erosion.
No, it's a totally different kind of erosion.
Totally
it doesn't
different.
have fluvial channels. What you're looking for with water erosion is what's called fluvial channels, meaning that's areas where water concentrated based on areas where it kind of condensed itself and then it flowed over something long enough that it created channels. It's
it's very simple, and it's very clear that it's water erosion. But
when Robert Schock went there in 1990, he said it took him 5 minutes to determine it was water erosion.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
What was he doing for the other 459?
So here's the example. This shows the Sphinx enclosure, and you can see what is obviously channels of water that have flown and concentrated in certain areas where it condenses, right? And that is classic water erosion. I feel like maybe a smart kid in 8th grade could probably determine that. That comes right out of right out of school.
For sure.
Would know that that's water erosion. And so, unfortunately, archaeologists and scientists are really they're pigeonholed.
Right.
They're stuck in a little spot, an uncomfortable place because all their predecessors and people before them have laid out this foundation of the ivory tower of archaeology and geology, and here we are finding so much evidence and information that challenges that. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and one of them is also that geologists and climatologists have downplayed the significance of these events in history because I don't think they want people understanding the cyclical nature of these catastrophes and how volatile they can be.
Yeah, agreed.
It's very fear-based. I think it would freak a lot of people out to understand the nature of the sun and its relationship with the earth and how often these cyclical events seem to occur.
Why don't we get into a little bit of the timeline then? Because I feel like there's additional evidence in terms of this globe-spanning civilization that exists all over the earth, and we could talk about that for hours and hours and hours. But I feel like people probably get it at this point. You know, it's all over Egypt. It's all over South America.
It's in. I can tell you where it's in. It's in Japan. It's in China. It's in Cambodia. It's in India. It might be in parts of Sri Lanka. It's certainly in Tonga in the Mariana Islands. We see it in Egypt. We see it in Baalbek, Lebanon. We see it in Menorca, Spain, Lake Vaughan. We see it throughout Turkey, like Hattusa. We see it in Peru, Bolivia, parts of Mexico, Mitla. I think, see if I'm missing anything. I think I got everything. The Great Wall below Jerusalem. That's one, and we see it also in parts of Ebla and throughout Syria. There's a couple of sites that are pretty amazing. Ain Dara is like the world doesn't even know about Ain Dara because the Turkish government accidentally blew it up during a bombing run and basically it's gone now. But anyway, that's the list. If I didn't miss anything,
I think Easter Island.
Thank you.
Well.
Easter Island I missed, and I'd have to think about if I missed any
And
more
I think
on there.
Greece.
Greece has one, like the Pix Wall. There's an incredible area outside of Athens where there's these giant megalithics that are part of the Pix Wall. And we know from Solon traveling down into Egypt from talking to this temple priest of Sais and to Sanchez that he told them that there was clearly a pre-Greek Athenian civilization that existed during the time of Atlantis. So we know that there was a pre-Greek culture.
So let's take it back into time,
Okay.
and let's figure out like educate us on your best thinking, your current theory about when did our ancestors that created all of this incredible stonework live, and what was going on? What did the earth look like, and what happened to them?
Sure. We can go, let's start backwards. So let's start now and then go backwards, okay?
Okay.
Instead of the other way around. So we are told in our history books, and it's still firmly established, that civilization emerged from hunter-gatherers around 6,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia with the Sumerian civilization that subsequently grew out of that into Babylon and then became sort of empires and like the Ottoman Empire and others that spread around the world, the Romans. And that is, in the Egyptians, of course, the dynastic Egyptians, right after around 4,000, 5,000 years ago, after the Sumerians. So that's what we're told. We're told that every single thing on the earth that was built is built during that time period, okay? And that anything before that is hunter-gatherers who constructed crude little monuments and things they left behind, like, maybe Stonehenge or something like that. So that's what we're told. And yet here we have all this information that's arguing against that, okay? So let's try to put this together. We'll do climate snapshots. We'll do timeline snapshots. We'll try to take the best evidence we can to recreate the timeline of civilization, not Homo sapiens sapiens. I'm not going to get into anthropology and weird things that happened 200,000 years ago. Like, that's for somebody else to do, okay? What we're going to do is the rise of civilization and when it emerged and when our first story of that iteration occurred, okay? Now, I will preface this by saying the most mysterious area by far that we still don't know is when Atlantis and potentially Lemuria Mu, if that existed, when that started. I will say in all my research, there doesn't seem to be anything conclusive to help settle that argument other than maybe like Edgar Cayce, who I think is probably one of, if not the only real genuine channelers that ever existed. He is certainly provided, he was like 80% sure or accurate. And he was the one that actually talked about the subterranean area under the right paw of the Sphinx and other things like that. Well, he was really interesting, and we're actually going to use Edgar Cayce for a little bit of our dating because we don't have a ton of information. We have to take whatever we can and try to see how it all correlates. Well, Edgar Cayce said that he believed that the flood of Zayasudra, the Noah flood, was actually more like 40,000 years ago, which is incredibly interesting with all that we're about to talk about. He says that Atlantis existed earlier than that, and that he gives us a date when Atlantis was destroyed, which is like 11,600 years ago, which is the same date we get from Plato, Solon, Diodorus, Plutarch, and the temple priests. So we know that there were more advanced civilizations that were existing before the Younger Dryas, but what about everything in between? Because we're going in order. Well, pre 6,000 years ago, we don't have any evidence all the way until we get closer to the Younger Dryas that humanity had really built or was doing anything other than hunter-gathering and surviving. We don't really have anything. And that's pretty telling to me. Because, again, like Graham says, it looks like we are a species with amnesia where we basically were reset. We had to start over again, hunter-gathering, fire, animal, hunting, and then we started emerging, which then becomes really mysterious after as well, believe it or not. But then we started emerging with civilizations and things take off from there, right? But because of the nature of our primitive start, and I don't think we necessarily started like that before, because of the nature of our primitive start and whatever occurred, we ended up going down a path of empire and conquering, and we became very warlike, and we became very different than we were before. I find no evidence in these symbols and motifs from these structures that we've identified as being older than Younger Dryas that war even existed. And I don't believe it did. And that's not that hard to understand if you think about a civilization that had completely different ideas and understandings and developed differently than we did.
No, it makes total sense, actually.
Right?
Yeah.
So before 6,000 years ago, all the way until...
If there's no ego, there's no war.
Yeah. So before 6,000 years ago, let's go 6,000 years and let's go back to 11,000 years ago. All we find evidence for is that it was like hunter-gatherers and people trying to survive. Volatile period, thousands of years. That's why we became reset. I feel like people will be like, how are you going to lose a whole civilization? How are we really going to forget everything and not understand anything? Because thousands of years went by of potentially solar-induced winters, climatic disasters, floods, just proportionate events that are on a scale beyond our comprehension on like a tenfold basis. And with those people barely surviving, in which the survivors of that may have been largely indigenous groups. And I want that to be really importantly understood. It looks like the survivors that built these things, their culture, they may have survived the Younger Dryas events, the Older Dryas events, but we find this weird thing where they may have been trying to rebuild, but then they just disappeared. So that's a really mysterious area, is right after the Younger Dryas, in whether or not there was an attempt to try to redo and rebuild by whoever survived, and then they just kind of poof disappeared, and then it became all primitive, right? But there was knowledge that was preserved in certain areas, and it was preserved all the way up until it was eventually refound and re-understood later by certain groups, okay? Now, the Younger Dryas catastrophes is basically what separated our current time of the Holocene. It's when the Ice Age was violently ending during that period. We're going to call it about 12,000 years ago, because it's on either end. And that event is what is described as destroying this global civilization, okay? So that is well established. We know that from multiple sources, geologic sources. We know that, like, fact that it's really interesting that Göbekli Tepe is dated to like right during that same time period, and then it was buried. So it makes me think that maybe either the survivors or just during that period buried that to protect it, just like we see in Ionis, because they knew these events were going on. Well, one of the things that's lost is right before the Younger Dryas, which was this period of massive upheaval, of tsunamis and volcanoes and solar coronal mass ejections, and potentially impacts, depending on who you're talking to. We get this whole other series of events at 14,500 years ago called the Older Dryas. And that was actually the first set of events that triggered the whole rest of the series of events. And I feel like it's really misunderstood to only study the Older Dryas and not study the Younger Dryas, or Oldest Dryas, and not study the Younger Dryas together, because they are very much part of the same series of events, right? So the Oldest Dryas is when you look at ice cores from Greenland and you look at ice cores from Antarctica, it is a massive spike in temperature. The greatest spike in temperature that we have had still. Even the Younger Dryas can't compare. The Older Dryas had a spike so great, it brought temperatures from the coldest that we've essentially seen in the last 300,000 years, coldest, to the hottest within a couple hundred years that we've seen on Earth, at least since, Paleozoic, ancient, dinosaur time periods. So what we're looking at is a rise so fast that it led to massive glaciation melting, and which would then flood ocean levels with fresh water, destabilizing currents, creating a whole global crisis of its own. Now, what's so fascinating about that dating is that in the 1900s, there were a number of explorers that were exploring what are called the New Siberian Islands, okay, which is in Siberia, and they found something so perplexing. They found all kinds of frozen ice age stuff, right? One of them, though, was really profound. I think it speaks to this whole entire timing and the trying to create a timeline and understanding of this. They found a 30-foot alder tree about 300 miles or more, hundreds of miles north of where any trees can grow, okay? So it's like it's in the tundra. You can't grow trees in the tundra. They find this one tree, 30 feet tall, with green leaves, completely preserved and frozen in permafrost and mud and dirt, right? They dig it out. They're like, what is this even doing here, right? Think about it. 14,500 years ago, we went from the coldest ever to a spike that was warmer than now in like 100 years. That would explain how you could get a tree growing in the middle of nowhere that didn't make sense, doesn't it? But then what happened right after 14,500 years? We get a drop that then got even colder in like 100 years. So you go massive spike, heat that is like weird, to a drop that was like instant, okay? This is why we find large megafauna like mastodons and mammoths that have undigested food in their throats, not even their stomach. They were in the middle of eating. They're like, imagine mammoths grazing. And then you have an event that causes the temperatures to drop so fast that they actually flash froze. And there's a really interesting study that actually came out from this. It's from the frozen food company that does all the frozen food stuff. I forget what they're called right now. I just forgot the name. They're one of the famous frozen food vegetable companies. They studied it. because they wanted to understand how a mammoth could freeze instantly without putrefaction, meaning rotting. And you know what they determined? It was fun. It was crazy. They are the ones who actually led a study on this. If I'll think of the name if I can, but they determined that the temperature to freeze the mammoth would have had to have been negative 150 degrees below zero. Negative 150. Now, the coldest temperature that's ever been recorded on Earth since modern human times was in Vostok, Antarctica, and it was like 134 below zero. We're talking about a temperature that was far greater than anything we've ever seen now, but happening instantly in the north, not Antarctica, in the northern hemisphere. This would explain why the tree froze, had green leaves, thinking it was summer, right? It wasn't like it changed into different color leaves and dropped them because it knew fall was coming. Instantly freeze, the mammoths all freeze. You get a die-off in the northern hemisphere of 44 million megafauna between the older Dryas and the younger Dryas. 44 million megafauna died. Gone. Mastodons, woolly saber-toothed tigers, giant beavers, huge bears. I mean, Granville talks about it all the time. And we're told that that was because of overhunting in North America, which is completely crap. The point I'm trying to make with that is it gives us dating. And we know that these things were happening on the earth during this time period, and it was catastrophic. So we can't underestimate how from 14,500 years ago to 11,500 years ago, you have a series of about 3 or 4 events within that led to the destruction of this entire global civilization. And it wasn't instantly, it was over time. It was over a period of 2,000 years that they were wiped out. 2,000 years. So I want that to be really understood. So now put that marker in the sand. Whatever this civilization was, they ended 11,600 years ago, gone. Okay?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but like, so there were definitely catastrophes. It was definitely a crazy time. There was definitely temperature changes. There was definitely floods. There was definitely like crops lost and everything got, it was an awful time to be alive. But why was that for sure the time where the civilization went extinct? Why couldn't it have been 10,000 years before that, or
Well, because we get really good dating from a number of places. For instance, we get the specific date of 11,600 years for the final destruction of Atlantis, from Sanchez, from the Temple of Sais, to Solon, Diodorus, Plutarch, Plato. Like that date was very firmly established. That date was later confirmed by Edgar Casey in his readings. Same date. Also, we get massive ocean level rises that flood out certain places significantly during that time period, which matches very much the descriptions of those events, right? We also get geologic evidence. I found some when I was with Robert Schock at Kefkalesi, we found these enormous stones that have been cut. They're beautiful. There's a bas-relief up there, just like what I had showed, but it's all kind of broken. And it has very extensive vitrification across the top. Vitrification is from a plasma strike, basically melting rock. To get that, you would have to have temperatures within that plasma strike that exceeded 2,000 degrees. Now, we find vitrification in a black mat all over the earth during that time period, showing that that volatile time period was a destruction of megafauna in a lot of the world. If 44 million megafauna went extinct that are as the hardiest animals on Earth, why would that be surprising that a civilization couldn't survive? And think about that today, right? Think about a polar bear, or right, a polar bear, or any creatures like that, or a muskox. Musk oxes live in arguably the most extreme environment of any creature on Earth. They live only in Greenland, mostly. They live in like ice caps. Okay, they dig for like algae and fungi and different things like that. They survive temperatures down to 50 below zero without even a challenge. So just imagine creatures even hardier than that freezing instantly and dying. It's well established and understood that all of a sudden humanity got reset right after that. It's like, and we saw Kaimakli And the underground cities of Darren Kuya, I think, are evidence of people having to survive enormous amounts of time underground.
Yeah. I guess I just asked the question because we know humans have been around for several 100,000 years. And we know it just you mentioned that in the last 50,000 years, you think there's probably been 4 big events. And so I just, I guess that was kind of the impetus for the question. Like, could it have been an earlier event that did it? But how long do you think that the civilization itself was an active, advanced civilization?
Well, that's the whole point. I mean, we have to look at a lot of different aspects of evidence. So you have indirect evidence and direct evidence. Indirect evidence is things like, well, if you were going to have a civilization reach massive heights with that kind of level of masonry, stonework, knowledge, sophistication with aqueducts and agriculture, and then traveling around the world and having that means, that would take a long time to be able to do. That is not just like a short thing. We have to understand the fundamentals that go into a civilization with the structure that's needed to create something like that. It's a huge undertaking. That would not be able to happen over a short period of time. You would have to have an enormous period of time to develop that, which is why I believe that all of these civilizations emerged at a much earlier time. Because if they had emerged around the Younger Dryas, and this is really important to understand, if they had emerged around the Younger Dryas, how would they have had any time to develop? That one of the arguments is that the Sphinx enclosure with the water erosion and the Sphinx itself is the consensus. I think most experts in my field believe is that it was a lion and it was facing Leo, the Leo constellation, because Leo was a guardian to the ancient Egyptians, a very important guardian. And when Robert Schoch went down there to look at the water erosion, he had a great relationship with John Anthony West, who was they're both great heroes of mine, and they always had this conversation that I love talking to Robert about it, because he told me they would burn the midnight oil and they would go back and forth for like more than 10 years over this one thing. It was, when did the Egyptian civilization build the pyramids and the Sphinx? Was it the Younger Dryas 12,000 years ago, or was it a much earlier cycle of that? And the reason they say that is because, and it's very accurate, the reason they said is this: the Sphinx faces Leo, but doesn't face Leo anymore. Okay. Also, the Great Pyramid, the King and Queen's Chamber, face Orion and Sirius, but not anymore. So you take precession of the equinox to understand where things used to face. You can plug it all into a computer, understand all of that, how it functioned. You can understand where things faced at certain times, where the Earth was, right? Well, they realized that the Sphinx only faced Leo at 2 times in the last 50,000 years. Only twice. So it means it could not have been created by the dynastic Egyptians, bar none, because nothing would have aligned during their time period, and they would never have built a bunch of things that were astronomically perfect that didn't align with anything. It would have been dumb, right? Oops, we're off by this much. No, it's from a different time. So what are those times? And those helps us understand this. Well, there's the Younger Dryas, we'll call it 12,000 years ago. That faced Leo. Robert Schoch is of the inclination that that's when it was built. But just like John Anthony West, I argue, how could a civilization build such grand things if they're in the middle of catastrophes during that time? It doesn't make sense to me. So John Anthony West had a different theory that I fully support. He said, well, there's a term in Egypt, in Edfu, called Zep-Tepi, and that's in the Temple of Horus. And Zep-Tepi means the first, or the beginning of it all. And he believes, and I believe, that it's representing the beginning of when the Egyptian civilization emerged and then built everything they did. And Zep-Tepi has been often associated with 38,000 years ago because of the star alignments, the alignment with Leo to the Sphinx, as well as that's the fact that that's the only precessional time that all that aligns again. What that would give you, 38,000 years ago, would give you an enormous amount of time to develop grand civilizations, right? You would then have over 10,000 years to create the greatest things you could ever imagine, in which they did. And that date, you put a pin on 38,000 years ago for a minute. That's when I think Egypt emerged. And that's when I think the pyramids were built and the Sphinx. Now, Edgar Cayce said that the flood of the Noah flood, the Zayasudra flood, keep in mind, I am not talking about the Christian story. It's based on that, but it has huge differences. The differences are Zayasudra, Noah, was a great king and a sage. It's not at all how he's described. He was the last king of a city called Shuruppak, which I just talked about Shuruppak. That's why Shuruppak is so important. And it describes how he was warned of a catastrophe coming. And he had to build this massive cedar boat with a shield on the top and they subsequently invented what's called bitumen, which bitumen is a type of sealant that we still use today in construction. And it's mentioned in the tablets that they had to use that to seal this entire thing, or whatever this event was, you would not survive. Now think about that. You need a boat with a top sealed on it, with bitumen everywhere, using massive cedar, and he was told he had to bring as much food as possible and some of his animals and his family. That's true. Absolutely. And he didn't warn his elders, and they all essentially all died. And here we have this event that occurs that floods part of the world, and then he ends up in the Ararat region, right? Edgar Cayce said that occurred about 40,000 years ago. It's very interesting to me, or 40 or 45,000 years ago, somewhere in that period. Very interesting to me how Zep-Tepi occurs right after that period, but not only that, but the last Champ event. The last Champ event, or the Adams event, is the most interesting and peculiar area for me because I think it explains what Solon was told by Sanchez, the temple priest in Egypt, when they said, "You Greeks remember only one deluge, but there have been many, primarily of water and fire." Water and fire, okay? So we know, I don't think he was talking about multiple events of the Younger Dryas necessarily. I think he was talking about another event that occurred way before that. And as I started putting all the pieces together, I realized that the Noah flood couldn't have been the Younger Dryas, because that's when all these civilizations were destroyed, not when things started. And so as I put the pieces together, I realized, what if we're talking about what we think is the Sumerians really is the first civilization, but they're not 6,000 years old. What if they're like 45,000 years old, and that they developed agriculture and all these things, which subsequently the survivors landed in the Ararat region, which is why Vaughn emerged like that, because you're right next to Mount Ararat. And it's extensively told that happened. Now, we take that understanding and we have to find an event that's a massive flood, right? So where is it? Well, that's called the last Champ event. The last Champ event is a really interesting story. It is the most extensively studied and only known geomagnetic excursion that has happened from our Earth in our known history. What that means is that the poles, the magnetic poles, moved and fluctuated so significantly by 45 degrees that they caused the entire Earth to go through like catastrophes, because it unbalanced the entire planet. Now, what the last Champ event is that in the 1960s, there were French geologists that were in the town of La Champ. And it's basically, there's also called the Last Champ lava fields, which is what they were studying. The Last Champ lava fields are very unique lava fields because they contain enormous amounts of space in between their cooled material of mineralization, which allows scientists to go in and they can measure the levels of carbon dioxide, oxygen, like snapshots of the Earth's atmosphere inside these bubbles. Does that make sense? So what they're measuring is different aspects of the climate. And what they found is that they had extensive evidence that during 41,500 to 42,000 years ago was an absolutely catastrophic event on Earth, where the poles moved and then eventually came back to where they started over the course of 800 years. And that entire event is called the Adams event. And the last Champ event is just the beginning. It's when the geomagnetic excursion began. But if you take both ends of it, it's called the Adams event. And during that, scientists firmly believe that it is the same time period that Neanderthals went extinct. There is a very interesting correlation, because there we have another type of hominid that didn't even survive. And it's like literally made for surviving in nature, far stronger than us. They go extinct during that event. Okay? Thank you. And not only that, but years later, in New Zealand, and they found other evidence of this around the world, there's a type of tree called the Kauri tree. You heard of this?
Quarry tree?
Yes, Kauri. And it's a type of massive tree in which they found this enormous Kauri tree that died and fell into a bog and then had been preserved. But it died 42,000 years ago. Okay, but it was an ancient tree and it had tree rings. And so they dug up this Kauri tree and they were able to study the carbon-14 radioactive aspects of these different rings, and they can see and study it. And they found a direct correlation between that tree dying with the rings and the last Champ lava fields as being extensive evidence, and it's accepted by all scientists, that it was a catastrophic geomagnetic excursion that happened during that time period. Okay. Now, if you're going to get a flood, you can only get a flood in two ways. One, not from rain. That's silly. The whole idea of it raining really extensively is silly to create that kind of thing. No. It's either a bulge of water gets created because the earth is offset. So a bulge will get created because of that. And you'll have a lot of water in the ocean that'll bulge out somewhere else and will create that kind of a flooding event. Or you can get massive, and maybe both. You can get massive earthquakes from on a tectonic level because the earth is wobbling and being completely unbalanced, and the sun is influencing it. And then you can get tectonic earthquakes that go off, and then you get tsunamis. Tsunamis can create massive flooding too, because where they end, the water stays for a while. I don't know if you know, like tsunamis do not just roll right back out. They'll often flood. If it's a huge tsunami, they'll flood a landscape and it'll take quite a while for that water to recede out. Okay. So when you're thinking about the Zaya Sutra Noah flood, how could you have a flood on that kind of scale, right? Letting out doves and they don't come back because there's no land in that area. I realized, I'm like, this is the only thing that could explain it. It's the only thing that makes sense in all of this timeline, all of it. If you were to try to put it together, is that this civilization, the last Champ event, was the Noah flood, and it allowed to the Neanderthals were destroyed and extinct, and here you have barely survivors of it. That's what they describe, is that his family provided some of the seeds of mankind. That's what it's described as. Okay, how is it a coincidence that only not even 100 miles from Mount Ararat is Lake Van, right? Just like it's described. And here you have this wild masonry of superior levels showing the greatest knowledge of anything. And yet we know that within Hebrew traditions, the sons of Noah went on to rebuild the world, it says. Japheth, Shem, and Ham go on to build some of the greatest structures of all. In fact, I have a book from the 1800s talking all about the pyramids named from John Taylor, and it describes how his theory, and he had all kinds of evidence, shows that the sons were responsible for building the pyramids of Egypt as well. So you're getting into something that's really strange here, and as I started exploring it and I looked at the dating of the vitrification and these things emerging, I said to myself, Zep Tepe's at 38,000 years ago. Here you have the emergence at Lake Van after the flood of the last Champ event, Adam's event, and you have something emerge at Lake Van that becomes grand and superior and then passes around the world and creates all kinds of other things. It's the perfect amount of time to do that, because you would have, right, the Adam's event ends at 42,000 years ago. You would essentially have all the way up until Younger Dryas catastrophes 11,600 years ago. You would have over 10,000 years to create a golden age. It all makes sense. It all adds up. All the dating evidence for each event lines up. And so what I believe is that human civilization is somewhere between 45,000 to 50,000 years old. And that everything that we know of may have come out of that after, including Atlantis. Atlantis, it's even possible, and I've been putting forth the idea that the reason why there's so many similarities with this idea of Peru and Bolivia with Egypt and Lake Van and Cambodia being a global culture is that was represented potentially by Atlantis, is that's what Atlantis was. It was that global civilization. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But it wasn't just in one place. It was, and so that is where I try to fit all those things in. And that's my timeline that I've been working on for probably 10 years. Wow.
It's like your life mission to kind of to get that, ultimately figured out, I guess, right? In
Yeah,
terms of
and now
to-
with the Mount Nemrut explosion and the Murat River data with Lake Vaughan, we can accurately date this civilization existing in paleo times before 12,000 years ago.
right, right. So 12,000 to 42,000 is 30,000 years.
Well, we'll call it 40 because we don't know if it emerged right away, but somewhere in there, yeah.
But so you're talking, 26,000 years or something of time for people to develop. And,
Imagine what we could become with sacred divine knowledge and not materialism and like a connection to the cosmos and the earth and understanding. Imagine what we could accomplish in 20,000.
not capitalism.
In 20,000 years, what could we do?
Political parties.
Maybe we could do things like building pyramids that have perfect ratios with the earth, sun, and the moon and the half ratio hemisphere of our planet. And maybe we could understand how to build in all the precise places that had to do with balance and harmony in the planet. Maybe we would map out basically a complete understanding of reality and purpose. And
What do you think the pyramids' function was? Why do you think that they were built?
well, notice there's three.
Yeah.
Just like everything we see everywhere, right? This concept. Notice that there's a balance in a relationship. Remember, it's always fractals. It's really weird, but for people to think that we are just endless grains of sand in an endless universe with endless civilizations and that we don't matter, I would point this out to you. There seems to be an intimate relationship and understanding of the balance of the sun, the earth, sun, the moon, with the balance between humanity's journey as well as the journey within all of those things and the balance that exists within them. Meaning that humanity and mankind seem to have a very important purpose in this that we have largely been not told or don't understand. And that we may go on to do things that they didn't even do because of our technology and our means. And the future of humanity, we may only be able to end up where we are because of them. Their sacrifice of what they left behind. I ultimately would be concerned that humanity would destroy itself if it didn't ultimately end up learning who it really is and understanding what it is and what its past is. Because that past does not show primitive cultures fighting and being warlike, like we're told with that all exists for the ancient people, but it shows a time when we were in a golden age and we were like divine. And I think that will redefine the entire humanity's understanding of who they are. It's not really just about timelines. It's about pointing out that, look, we used to be something far different than we are now, and we forgot. And it's really about finding our way home. It's always a cyclical circle. You start at source and you start connected and perfect. And then the wandering is part of that circle that goes away. And then you eventually find your way back. It always works that. Everything in the universe is based on cycles. Hermeticism explains the natural law and that everything is dominated by cycles. Nothing is permanent, which means that no matter what happens, our civilization here will not be permanent because everything is in cycles and nothing is forever.
Yeah, well said for sure. So yeah, but I mean, in terms of do you think that the Great Pyramid itself with the chambers and the shafts and
I didn't even explain the purpose of that.
Yeah,
thanks for getting me back to that. Yeah. Okay, so I think that it's based on a direct relationship of the earth, the sun, and the moon. So they're built to map that. Look at Teotihuacan of Mexico. Other side of the world, same exact thing, right? Temple of the sun, temple of the moon, temple of Quetzalcoatl. Same thing in Egypt. You're looking at this relationship to the whole of the three. And so when you look at the fact that the Egyptian pyramids are built on the 30th parallel, very important part of the earth, we can see that they seem to be built in the center of the landmass of the planet in a very specific place that I believe the ancients may have been trying to balance their ancient world. And I don't think that was entirely their only purpose. I think they had multiple purposes, maybe even connected to human ascension or enlightenment, or even maybe some kind of a transportation type of portal type of aspect, or in conjunction with being balancers of the earth and everything. I think there's always multiple reasons why something is made, but clearly they're not for tombs, and they never were.
What about the tunnels that we see underground in Turkey and under Egypt and whatnot? Is that so people living there potentially for multiple generations to escape the outside conditions on the earth? Is that kind of the you're thinking that was probably built around the Younger Dryas time period? Or
Well, there's two different aspects to that. There are subterranean areas under ancient places. Did not function as that, I don't think. And then there are refugees or places of refuge, like where you would go to survive enormous amounts of time, right? The complexity of Derinkuyu and its sister city, Kaimakli, are very underestimated, I think, today. The understanding of the amount of levels that were created, more than 20 levels, thank you, with specific air shafts and areas where animals were raised and where there was libraries, there was hospitals, there was entire areas of people living there. Basically, they created an entire world underground,
Right.
where they could survive.
They had everything they needed.
What's wild is that Derinkuyu goes deep into the ground. And most people don't know this, but there are shafts and tunnels you can't go in the public that are way down below that archaeologists have found that, and this is wild. They found a massive tunnel at the bottom of Derinkuyu that goes underground for 5.5 miles to Kaimakli, its sister city, why would you do that unless you couldn't go to the surface? Right. So if you're going to visit him, like, hey, Matt's in Kaimakli. I haven't seen him in a couple months, right? He's my half brother.
Right.
Right. I'm going to go see Matt. It was like it would be a journey underground where you would go all the way to the lowest level. There would be a tunnel, and then you would walk 5.5 miles to Kaimakli, and then there would be other families and other people, and that was how they traveled. Why would you go to the lengths of creating that? First of all, how would you excavate and move all the material out? That's one.
Right.
Let alone, if you're going to make that tunnel at the bottom, you would then have to take all of that excavated material and move it through all of these other things and then get to the surface. Today, we have never found any evidence of any of the material that was removed from these areas anywhere. It's like it just disappeared. Which, how could it disappear? Probably a huge flood.
Or the water table, potentially? Could they have just dumped it into the water table underneath the city?
I think it's more likely that they did bring it somewhere and then some flood carried it away and it's not there anymore. Yeah.
It's just crazy. A mile of 5 miles is what, an hour and a half or something, if you're walking 20 minutes a mile. So
they created that tunnel because obviously they couldn't go to the surface.
They couldn't go to the surface for an hour and a half. That's crazy.
The question is, like how long were they in there?
Yeah.
How many generations did they have to survive?
Yeah.
And how many actually made it out?
Yeah. And do you think this was during the time that all of those megafauna were going extinct on the surface?
So imagine the Zayasudra Noah flood occurs during the 42,000 year period, okay? We all remember. Like they remember. They're like, wow, so there's cycles of absolute catastrophes that can destroy everything. We need to be prepared for the next one. So the reason I say that is that they mapped out the cosmos. They understood precession. They understood cycles. They understood movements, cycles of the sun. They were mapping and preparing for the next one. They knew that it was going to come. And so what I think they did is that when this civilization around Lake Vaughan was passing around the world, creating other civilizations, I think a lot of them came together at some point. I don't know when it was, but at some point came together to create the largest underground cities in the world. And they're all in one place.
Everybody's got a prepper. Everybody's got a...
They're all in one region of Turkey that has a very specific type of soft volcanic stone that makes it very easy to excavate and cut, but it's also in the center of the landmass, and it would be a very good place to go from anywhere in the world to that point to try to survive. And I think that's exactly what happened. I'm not saying there are not other underground cities or places that people survived. There likely are. I think those are the largest that have been found. And I mean, considering the fact that we didn't find Derinkuyu until 1940, and when a person was working in their house, and this is funny. You know this story? In 1940s, a guy had chickens, and the chickens started escaping into a hole, like just disappearing, and like, heck are the chickens going? So he knocks the wall down and ends up finding the largest underground city the world has ever known. Thank you. The chickens found it,
Thank
really.
you, the chickens. Yeah, we probably wouldn't know about it today. Yeah, that's incredible, man. This has been probably, I mean, it's been the most interesting, fascinating, compelling exploration and the most detailed exploration that I've done on the possibility, the probability, the likelihood of an ancient lost civilization that existed on Earth. And
Well, thank you.
yeah, for sure. No, it's been fascinating. And I'm excited about your work, and I'm excited about your trip that you're taking to Turkey and to learn more. And
I can't wait. I'm
yeah,
counting the days down.
yeah, I'm sure.
3
I'm
weeks
sure.
from today, we film all these incredible places in Turkey, and by the time this comes out, we'll probably already be back. But it's just going to be amazing to do paradigm shifting work with such incredibly talented experts and archaeologists. I mean, the fact that we can work with archaeologists on the sites and they're open to explore this shows me that maybe science has a chance to come back and be objective again.
I think they're going to have to. Well, I mean, once the evidence is out there, they're going to have no choice other than to be objective and to admit, okay, we missed this one. Oops, you know.
But isn't that the whole point? Is science is never ending?
Yeah.
You always continuously refine based on new evidence and change perspectives based on that evidence. You don't just stay pigeonholed in one place and refuse to budge like like a big steer or whatever that doesn't want to move and you're like pushing on it. That's not the way science works, right? If a scientist is like, if I say all this to a scientist and then they're like, now, like, what do you mean no? What is your evidence to challenge this against it to say no? Like, that's why I would love to do a debate with like Flint Dibble or something someday, or any of these experts in their field. I would love to have a friendly, isn't that nice? Wouldn't that be nice just to have a friendly scientific discussion where you can present your evidence and not get angry and just have a good conversation?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I haven't I haven't crossed the line, and people have asked me if am I going to have Flint Dibble on the show, and you know, it's I think it would be a difficult interview for me, but if he's here talking to somebody like you, I would totally have you
You should
guys
set up for us to have a little conversation.
I would be happy to set it up.
I would love to do that.
If Dibble's interested in it, then
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right, cool.
Yeah, I think there was some unfortunate downfalls for the debate with Graham and Dibble.
Yeah.
That I think we can provide a little bit more evidence, because there are areas in Graham's work that I don't agree with, like the Yonaguni Monument and some other Gadong Padang and other areas of being like something to focus on. It's okay to do that. That's the whole point of research and the scientific method, right?
Yeah, I had Danny Hillman on, who's the Gadong Padang, like the head guy that was out there. It was a phenomenal, fascinating conversation.
But they seem primitive to me compared to other sites. It's interesting to me that like stonework doesn't seem to lie to me. Yeah. And when you look at the superior craftsmanship of certain places compared to others, you see a primitive nature versus a non-primitive nature. And I think the biggest area that humanity has been conditioned and engineered into a false mindset is thinking that if something is old, it's primitive. That's it. And I think that mindset needs to really be changed. So we have to think, well, yeah, if something's old, it can be primitive. But if something is really old, it's probably like amazing and just incredible craftsmanship. Because again, that's that division between different epochs and different time periods of humans.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Well, awesome. Good stuff, my brother. That was a lot of fun to talk to you, to get to know you over the last couple of days. And
you too, Matt.
Yeah. Do you think we missed anything?
I think that was amazing. I think we covered a lot.
I think we covered
Absolutely.
a lot as well. Yeah.
That was great.
Very good.
I would love to be back on. Maybe if you can set that up with Flint, that would be great.
That'd be cool. Either way, I'm going to have you back on.
Okay, great.
You know, either way, I'd love to have you on. You know, maybe whatever annually or whatever, just to keep up with what you're doing and how your theory's progressing. That'd be fantastic.
That'd be great.
But in the meantime, prior to that, if we can do a Dibble debate, that would be fantastic.
Amazing. I will say this statement right now. I will debate in a friendly way. I'm not aggressive. I will debate any academic in the world. So if anyone's listening, I will go I would love to debate any academic in the world. Cool.
Love it. Well, very good, man. That's a great challenge. And no, I really appreciate your time, your knowledge, your passion. I mean, it just feels like there's way too much here for there to be nothing here.
Exactly.
You know, I mean,
it's incredible, and we are on the very edge of paradigm shifting knowledge and information that I think will fundamentally enrich and change humanity.
Yeah,
I really do.
Well said, and agreed. Very good, man. We'll wrap it up. Thank you, Ryan.